Chapter 332. Xiaoyin was a sensible woman. She was already satisfied that the young master cared for her so much, talked to her so much, and even spent an entire night with her. For a woman like her, if she were to follow another man, even if she could become a concubine, she wouldn't have any status. Furthermore, her master wouldn't be able to counsel her alone. After Xiaoyin's matter was settled, it was easier to talk to Lady Xiang. In comparison, she didn't have as deep of a relationship as Xiaoyin and Yang Qindong. She had only become the fourth madam because her admiration had turned into love. Although their relationship after marriage was very good, she was still born in the streets and had once stayed in a place like the Nine Arts Workshop. Her position was still very low. Yang Qindong only needed to persuade the great madam to come forward and speak with her before agreeing to remain in the capital. However, she still expressed her reluctance to part with Yang Qindong. For this reason, the sixth young master had to console her. After interacting with her after marriage, he found that Lady Xiang wasn't just beautiful, she was also very sensible. The two's relationship quickly warmed up. After this short separation, their feelings for each other would only deepen when they met again. The two madams who stayed in the residence were settled. Yang Qindong did one last thing. He paid a visit to the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao, and the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji. Yang Qindong went to Wang Ji's place alone, and no one knew what they talked about. However, when he left the residence, his expression was calm, so it should have gone smoothly. When he went to the Hu estate, he went with Hu Xiao. The Minister of Rights personally received him, and his eldest son, Hu Changning, accompanied him for a banquet. Hu Xiao could understand why Yang Qindong chose to leave at this time. No matter how capable a person was, they couldn't always stand at the heart of the storm. Otherwise, who knew what would happen in the storm? This step of retreating to advance was a good one. With Hu Ming's support before Yang Qindong left, he asked Hu Ming to protect the interests of the Yang manor and the Yang family, as well as his brothers and sisters. Hu Ming naturally agreed. Since the Hu and Yang clans were already connected by marriage, they were now on the same side. As long as they didn't commit any grave mistakes, there shouldn't be any worries about their safety. The trip to the Hu and Wang clans went very smoothly, and Yang Qindong decided to leave the capital 3 days later. Yang Qindong was leaving the capital for a period of time, saying that he was going back to Lord Janning to pay respects to his ancestors. As the 11th anniversary of his late father's death was approaching, the news that he was going to sweep the grave quickly spread through the upper echelons of the capital. Regarding this matter, many people clapped their hands and cheered. In their opinion, this was the price that Yang Qindong had to pay for bringing down Yu Shiyue. You can't take all the benefits. Yu Shiyue had fallen from power, and Yang Qindong had to leave for a period of time. It was really a lose-lose situation. Whether it was the Yang clan's prosperity in business, or the uniqueness of the Yang clan's academy. In truth, Yang Qindong didn't have many friends among the scholars. He didn't fit in with the crowd, and he didn't take the initiative to interact with others. He always maintained a lofty attitude as he drifted away from the circles of power. Of course, this would make the acting sect master, Zhu Qiyu, let down his guard, but at the same time, the disadvantage would also be revealed. In some matters, there would be few people who would speak up for him. This time, Yang Qindong was going to leave. Everyone rejoiced even more. Some people even criticized that this move could not be taken as a sign. Yang Qindong naturally wouldn't try to explain this. He believed that facts spoke louder than words, and there would come a day when he would tell these people with his actions. At that time, he could almost see how resounding that slap would be. While everyone was saying that Yang Qindong had to leave the capital, there were naturally some people who disagreed. For example, the people of the Yang clan. Yang Qindong's fourth brother was one of them. Putting aside the fact that he was originally a member of the Yang clan, he had to consider the interests and reputation of the Yang clan. Ever since Yang Qindong came to the capital, his life had been completely different from before. Internally, there was more money in the estate, and he didn't need to plan carefully before he dared to do anything. Externally, he could walk on the streets with a straighter back. Even when chatting with people he was familiar with or in formal occasions, when others introduced him, their expressions would become much more respectful. Not only would this make one's face glow, it would also slowly give birth to a feeling of complacency. Yang wasn't a fool, and he naturally knew who had given him all this. Thus, when he heard that Yang Chendong was leaving, he absolutely couldn't bear to part with him. Later on, the steward at his side casually said, "Why not go with the Duke? You're returning to your hometown to pay respects to your ancestors, and Yang is originally a member of the Yang clan. Nothing could be more appropriate than to go back and take a look." These unintentional words immediately moved Yang Chendong, and he hurried over just as Yang Chendong was preparing to leave 3 days later. Yang Hodong truly hadn't expected that his fourth brother would want to go with him to the south. This time, he was using the excuse of returning to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors, but as for what he was really going to do, only he knew best. His fourth brother's sudden appearance was indeed somewhat out of his expectations, but it was only a little unexpected. This clearly wasn't much compared to the major things Yang Chendong planned to do in the future. Thinking about it, since fourth brother had such thoughts, it would be a good idea to bring him back with him. This way, there would be a proper person in charge during the ancestral worship ceremony, and he would be able to worry less and use less of his brain power. Yang Chendong agreed. After all, he couldn't find any reason to refuse. But because of this, Yang was overjoyed. He hurriedly left the Yang clan manor, and he also needed to return to his residence to pack up. Of course, compared to Yang Chendong, who had a lot of things to take care of, he didn't need to worry as much. It was only 3 days, and it really passed in the blink of an eye. 3 days later, Yang Chendong set off. First Madame Hu Yan and third Madame Shui squeezed into the soft sedan chair with him. The others were indeed not as fortunate, and most of them followed on foot. Only the master, Yang Chendong, fourth master, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others rode horses. Most of them, Lung Feng, walked. Among the people riding horses was the Yang clan's old housekeeper, Yang Hai. As an old man who had followed the old master for decades, young Master Yang was no longer young, and his hair was more white than black. This time, he was going to follow Yang Chendong back to the Jian clan's old house, and he would most likely retire there in the future. This time, when he left, tears flowed down his face. They were tears that he couldn't bear to part with his son, Guanyang of the Yang clan manor. After all, transportation was not developed in ancient times. After this separation, no one knew if they would meet again in their lives. As Yang Chendong's guards, the first captain, Qiu Vi, and the second captain, Dao Xiao, naturally had to follow him. Not only that, Wu Sheng led a company of Lung Feng to protect him on the way. Yang San secretly led the main staff of the security bureau, as well as the members of the Wolf Fang and Ghost Shadow Sniper team to follow him closely. With them, unless the Great Ming Dynasty sent an army to suppress the border and could charge fearlessly, it was unlikely that they could threaten Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong finally left the capital. On this day, in many corners of the capital, and in many important places, there were sighs of relief. They didn't feel it before, but now that Yang Chendong had left, they seemed to be relieved and could finally breathe a sigh of relief. As for why all this was happening, no one could explain it clearly. While the people in the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty were greatly relieved, on the other side of the sea, the land of Japan was covered with dark clouds at this moment, and thunder was brewing, as if it was waiting to explode at any time. The General's Mansion, also known as the Great General's Mansion, was the mansion of the famous Japanese General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. In the capital of Japan, Ping and Beijing, on the most prosperous street, which the Japanese called Kyoto, there was a large courtyard that covered 4 square areas. At this time, if one could look down from the sky, he would find that there were people coming and going in this courtyard. There were no less than 500 patrolling warriors, not to mention some slaves who were responsible for serving their masters, and some hidden forces. This was the power of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. It could be seen from the place where he lived. If it had to be described, it could be called a prince's mansion, or even a small imperial palace. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was very flamboyant in his work. In his early years, he had helped the current Empress of Japan, who was known as the Emperor of Hohua Court, ascend to the throne. Based on this kind of luxury was not excessive. Almost like the Great Ming Dynasty, Japan was also in a serious feudal era, and there was a clear hierarchy between people. In comparison, the imperial family was naturally the most powerful force, followed by the civil officials and generals, followed by the merchants, samurai, ninjas, and finally the ordinary soldiers. The lowest level was the slaves, and the number of slaves was not small, accounting for more than 3/5 of the total population of Japan at that time. It could also be said that the development of Japan at that time was based on the contributions of the slaves, and the minority was built up by eating, drinking, and playing. As a minority of the minority, Ashikaga Yoshimasa controlled most of the military power in the country. In many cases, his power could even compete with the imperial family. Some military affairs had reached the point where it was difficult to carry out without his consent. As time went by, more and more people came to him, and his power grew bigger and bigger. This morning, there were still many people at the side door of the general's mansion. Most of them were pretentious. They all said that they were excellent and wanted to be noticed by Bolu, because this often meant that they were likely to rise to the sky and officially become a high-ranking person in society. Chapter 333. Every time the side door opened, and the steward of the general's residence came out, they would fight to be the first to present their invitations. However, no one knew how many of them would be chosen by the general in the end. It had been more than 2 hours since breakfast, and the side door had yet to open. Many of the people who were waiting were anxious. They did not know what was going to happen to them, and some of them did not even have time for dinner. Just as they were feeling anxious, the main door of the general's residence suddenly opened. This movement instantly attracted everyone's attention. Out of instinct, their footsteps were almost jogging as they moved forward. From their point of view, it was either the general's residence was welcoming an important guest or the general was going out. If it was the latter, this would be the best opportunity for them to recommend themselves. They moved quickly. The samurais who rushed out of the general's residence moved even faster. They were the first to rush out and formed a human net to cut off the connection between the side door and the main door. Then, they stood still like wooden pillars and stared vigilantly at the people who wanted to come to the general's residence. They looked like they were about to tell them to be obedient. If anyone dared to move, the sharp katanas in their hands would not recognize them. The solemn atmosphere with a trace of killing intent finally caused everyone to stop in their tracks. Then they looked curiously at the main door of the general's residence. They wanted to see what was going on that caused such a huge commotion. While everyone was waiting, there was finally movement at the main door of the general's residence. A sedan slowly came in, and a group of people appeared on both sides. No one could clearly see who was coming. What was even more surprising was that the sedan actually went straight through the main door of the general's residence and slowly disappeared from everyone's sight. This sudden scene really stimulated everyone. Then, everyone seemed to have forgotten their purpose of coming here and started to guess who the guest was. A guest who could make the general's residence open the main door to welcome naturally had a high status. Even in the entire Japan, there were not many people who could receive such an honor, not to mention such a mysterious guest. The identity of the guest only made everyone more curious. In the inner courtyard of the general's residence, the palanquin entered as though there was no one around. It only came to a stop in front of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's reception hall. Then, the curtains of the palanquin opened, and a man wearing a dark modern tang suit walked out. His attire did not match the attire of the time. As soon as the man appeared, he first looked around. When he found that this was a very quiet small courtyard, a trace of satisfaction appeared on his face. Right at this moment, a burst of bold laughter came from the hall. A tall man with a mustache laughed and spoke in standard Japanese. "Welcome to Jing Xuanquan's presence. You must be tired from the journey." "Greetings, great general." Jing Xuang, on behalf of Commander Gao Xiong, pays his respects to the great general. The man in the dark-colored tang suit called Jing Xuang immediately lowered his head and said with great respect, "That's right, the person who came was Jing Xuang, one of the students that Yang Qindong personally taught. Later, because of his outstanding learning ability, he became one of the first political instructors in Yang Xie's new army. His father was the current director of the Chisun City cement factory. His name was Jing Guang, And he was also one of the people that Yang Chendong admired and trusted. This time, Jing Shuang appeared in Japan at the general's residence under the orders of Regiment Commander Gao Xiong. He came to Japan to meet with General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had real power in Japan. At the same time, he also wanted to show the general the tablet that recorded Princess Junko personally killing Kimura Yoshimasa in the basement of the Yang family manor. Ever since Yang Xie's new army occupied Chisun City and began to develop vigorously, they began to slowly control this area of the sea. As Japan was a maritime country, it was inevitable that they would trade with their neighboring countries. Therefore, it was inevitable that they would come into contact with each other. After several conflicts, Ashikaga Yoshimasa did not gain the slightest advantage. Out of respect for the strong, Ashikaga Yoshimasa began to purposefully make contact with Yang Xie's new army. This matter was reported to the higher-ups, and with Yang Chendong's approval, Gao Xiong also intentionally or unintentionally expressed some goodwill. Thus, the relationship between the two sides began to strengthen. This might be the strength of the Japanese, but it might also be their weakness. When you were stronger than them, they would always lower their heads and act like a dog, and then learn from your advanced knowledge and experience. They would even nod their heads and bow their heads shamelessly. However, there would come a day when they had the strength to overtake you, and it would inevitably be a merciless blow. For example, towards the powerful Yang Xie's new army at sea, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had always shown sufficient respect. This time, when he learned that the other party's envoy wanted to meet with him, he was extremely respectful. This was the reason for the scene just now. Under the warm welcome of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, Jing Shuang stepped into the guest hall, and the two of them began the so-called friendly discussion. As if he did not want his subordinates to see his weak and submissive side. Or perhaps he knew that Jing Shuang's arrival had a special meaning. Ashikaga Yoshimasa quickly cleared everyone in the hall, and then personally poured a glass of sake for Jing Shuang. His originally smiling face became much more serious. Jing Shuang-kun, I wonder what brings you here this time. Is Commander Gao Xiong willing to form an alliance with this general? Forming an alliance at sea had always been Ashikaga Yoshimasa's wish. After knowing the power of Commander Gao Xiong's new warship through different channels, the general who envied the strong and longed for the powerful has always been fighting for this goal. For this reason, he did not hesitate to sell several merchant ships in Japan to the other party, just to gain a favorable impression and a basis for cooperation. This time, Jing Shuang's sudden arrival naturally gave him hope for the future. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's longing gaze was seen in Jing Shuang's eyes. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall what he had said when he attended the meeting with Commander Gao Xiong and the Naval Operations Staff Officer. When everyone thought that they could form a temporary alliance with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, they could rely on the other party's influence and powerful intelligence network to obtain more information on the sea. From there, they could take some targeted actions. This was far better than randomly searching the sea and trying their luck. The staff officers all agreed that even if they formed an alliance with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and even let them view the new warships, they would not be able to steal this advanced knowledge. This was originally a matter of mutual benefit, but for some reason, when this matter was reported to the young master of the capital, it was denied without hesitation. Moreover, no reason was given for this denial, which made Commander Gao Xiong and the staff officers very confused. But no matter what they thought, since this was the decision made by the sixth young master, no one dared to question it, and no one could change it. These people had all seen the glory of the sixth young master, and they all knew that everything that Chikin City and everyone else had today was thanks to the sixth young master. They were also the group that had been the most heavily brainwashed. In their words, any decision made by the sixth young master, they would resolutely uphold it. Any decision made by the sixth young master, they would unswervingly follow it. This was the so-called Tu Van Ease. His thoughts returned to reality. Facing Ashikaga Yoshimasa's urgent gaze, Jing Shuang lightly shook his head. Then, without waiting for the other party to say anything disappointed, he changed the topic. Great General, although we cannot form an alliance with you this time, we have come with great sincerity. Sincerity. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was somewhat disappointed that the two sides couldn't form an alliance, but after hearing Jing Shuang's words, he became interested. He didn't know what else could be considered sincerity other than the so-called alliance. Although the trace of disdain in his eyes quickly disappeared, for Jing Shuang, who worked in politics and dealt with people's hearts every day, it was still sharply observed by him. However, he didn't say anything. Instead, he smiled and took out a tablet that was hundreds of years older than the current era from his bag. When the white tablet was taken out, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's expression didn't change. Obviously, before he saw its function, he only treated it as an ornamental object. He didn't know that it had the ability to record people's figures. Of course, he soon knew that Jing Shuang, who had practiced several times, turned on the tablet with familiarity, and then carefully inserted the USB flash drive in her arms. All these movements in the eyes of Ashikaga Yoshimasa had long made him stunned. The moment the tablet was turned on, he was actually petrified. When he saw the colorful screen on it, he didn't know what words to use to describe his current mood. He only knew that he was scared, and even a little scared. When the USB flash drive was plugged in, it began to play the scene of Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami being tied up. This great general, who had experienced many wars and been on the battlefield, couldn't help but exclaim in shock. "How did you put Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami in this thing?" "That's right, Ikegami, Ikegami, Ikegami." Jing Shuang didn't want to explain such a layman's words, but he did forget that when he first came into contact with these things, he had the same reaction. "Great general, don't be impatient, just keep watching." Reminded by Jing Shuang, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's eyes fell back on the tablet screen, and then he saw Junko holding a dagger. At this moment he still couldn't help but shout, "Your Highness Junko!" It was just that after this shout, Ashikaga Yoshimasa quickly shut his mouth without being reminded, as if he was afraid that he would miss something because of shouting. Chapter 334. On the screen, Junko appeared, and then killed Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami, who were powerless to resist, and then quietly left. When the video reached this point, Jing Shuang simply closed the computer, and then the hall was silent for a while. The sudden scene gave Ashikaga Yoshimasa an unreal illusion. He had never experienced such an experience, so when he looked at Jing Shuang, he couldn't help but make a request. "Can you show me again?" "Okay, but please don't talk anymore. Watch carefully. Remember, you only have one chance. You should know that such a sign doesn't appear at all times." After saying all this in a mysterious manner, Jing Shuang opened it again and released it. The scene she had just seen was displayed once again. This time, Ashikaga Yoshimasa looked very carefully. When he was sure that he saw Kimura Yoshida and the other two, his face became very ugly. At this moment, he wasn't thinking about how this thing appeared in front of him. What he was thinking about was that it was actually the hand of the lady. Where did she get the courage to do such a thing? Could it be that she was instructed by the emperor? Kimura Yoshida was one of his people, and the Japanese leaders were very clear about this. Now that this person was targeted, did it mean that the emperor was already dissatisfied with him, and was going to kill him? All this was just to eliminate external forces. If he didn't do anything, he was afraid that the next big knife would fall on his head. A sudden visit, a real scene that he had never seen before, stirred up the heart of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had charged into the battlefield and planned strategies. Seeing that he fell into silence, Jing Shuang, who was sitting opposite him, had no expression on her face, but her heart was very clear that a seed of hatred was planted. As for what effect it would have, it all depended on the development of the next thing. There is heaven above, there is Suzhou and Hangzhou below. The illusion came from Song Fanqingda's records of Wu County. Heaven above, Suzhou and Hangzhou below. It meant that heaven above was the most beautiful, and Suzhou and Hangzhou were the most beautiful. It described the beauty, prosperity and wealth of Suzhou and Hangzhou. The beautiful scenery of Hangzhou was unparalleled in the world, and the scenery of the West Lake was the best in the world. Many popular stories had appeared here in the past. For example, Bai Suzhen and Su Xian had met here by chance. At this moment, the Leifeng Tower in the story was still standing. Opposite the Leifeng Pagoda, there were numerous restaurants, which were specially set up for people who came here to rest and eat. Among them, the largest restaurant, Xinglong Restaurant, was by the window. The view here was broad and the scenery was excellent. In addition, it was May, the time when spring and summer alternated. It was indeed a place with birds singing and flowers fragrant. It was better than the polar regions of the world. The table in the best position was already filled with famous local snacks. The signature dishes of the restaurant were spread all over the table, showing that the guests who came to eat were rich and imposing. A pot of old wine that had been warmed was still sitting on the table. Occasionally, a spring breeze would blow past, and the fragrance of the wine would be blown out. When one smelled it, it was really mellow and rich, making one intoxicated. Sixth brother, this place is really good. The climate is pleasant. I don't want to go back. Next to the table, a rather elegant middle-aged man tasted the delicious food on the table and couldn't help but say. Then he kept greeting the other two women at the table. Come on, sisters-in-law, don't just look at the beautiful scenery. You also need to eat. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a waste? Yes, fourth brother is right. The two women who were greeted shyly nodded their heads. They were both beautiful and had white veils on their faces. However, the youngest man at the table first moved the corners of his mouth slightly, and then he said with a smile, Yen shui? Since you are here to have fun, you don't need to wear a veil. It's hard to see things. Take it away. I'll listen to sixth brother. Hu Yen, who was called, seemed to have a little struggle in her heart, but in the end, she obediently took off her veil. Sure enough, at this moment, when looking at the beautiful scenery of Westlake in the distance, it was much clearer and more thorough. At this point, everyone could guess that the four people at the table were Yang Qindong, Hu Yan and Madame Shui. After leaving the capital, they went all the way south. They passed by Tianjin, Suzhou, and bought some good and famous silk and satin. Then they went to Songjiang Prefecture, and arrived in Hangzhou. As soon as they entered this place, Hu Yan and Madame Shui were very excited. They had heard about White Snake from Yang Qindong, so they were naturally curious about this place. Now that they had the opportunity to see this scene, how could they not be immersed in it? At the same time, they also wanted to see if they could really see the deified love story between White Snake and Su Xian here. In later generations, there was a song that said, "The stories in fairy tales are all lies." At this moment, it was indeed true. From a distance, there were many people who came here to play. However, by Jinxing in white, the maid Xiaoqing in green, and Su Xian in scholars' robes were nowhere to be seen. There wasn't even a single person who looked like them. Hu Yan, who was full of hope, was disappointed because she couldn't find any of them. Madame Shui, who was standing beside them, said something. She probably said that her husband was good at teasing people. Anyway, the two girls kept laughing. It was very indecent for a woman to laugh in a diplomatic setting, especially a married woman. Although Yang felt a little uncomfortable, he still endured it in the end. His sixth brother wasn't as simple as a younger brother. He could see everything clearly, so he must have a clear idea of what to do with women. Maybe there was a deeper meaning to this matter? However, Yang Qindong's thinking was simply based on the ideas of the later generations. Equality between men and women was not necessarily fair, but at least it was not strange for women to laugh in public. Since they came out to play, they just wanted to have fun. As long as they were happy, it was fine. As for whether such behavior would attract other people's attention, he didn't care very much. Few people here knew him, and it wouldn't be long before he left here. It was just a post house in life. There was no need to be so serious. Yang Qindong didn't take the two women's laughter to heart. He looked deeply and quietly at the West Lake in front of him. In his previous life, Yang Dong had been very busy. He trained, completed tasks, trained again, and completed tasks again. It wasn't until he was old and his physical fitness and stamina had declined that he went to the headquarters. As a result, his beautiful life and youth were wasted. It was good to be young again at this moment. He would cherish every minute and every second. 9 out of 10 things in life did not go according to one's wishes. Yang Qindong wanted to properly feel this tranquil atmosphere. However, there was a burst of extremely noisy noise coming from downstairs. Although it was separated by the floor and could not be completely transmitted, it was obvious that there was some agitation. Dang dang dang, the sound of footsteps quickly began to be heard. Then a middle-aged man in brocade clothes came up with a face full of anxiety. After Tigers Mane and Beta Persei, who were guarding the entrance of the building, confirmed that there was no murderous intent on the other party, they invisibly let the man go, allowing him to smoothly come to Yang Qindong's table. "Oh, honored guest, I'm really sorry. Your table was originally reserved. Now that the owner is here, I want to see if you..." The middle-aged man's surname was Sunday. He was the owner of Xinglong Restaurant. Just now, he was the one who received Yang Qindong and his group. He also said that the condition of the private room upstairs facing the street was the best and so on. But how did the private room get booked in the blink of an eye? This matter was rather intriguing and thought-provoking. As one of the capital's hedonistic sons, Yang had experienced this kind of thing more than once or twice. It must be said that businessmen were all profit-seeking. Sometimes, they were especially serious in this aspect. They could tell several different stories and different versions with just a few words. Of course, sometimes they might be coerced. After all, the status of businessmen in the Great Ming Dynasty was not high. They once had no social status. Just like now, Boss Sun was urging him to say such words. Perhaps he wanted to make more money, or perhaps he was being pressured by something. But no matter what, this was a bit like bullying. Yang, who was clear about this, would not give in to the other party. He immediately stood up from the table and said with a serious face, "What's the matter? What do you mean it's already reserved? That's not what you said just now." No matter what, he was still a descendant of the Yang family. He had been influenced by what he saw and heard since he was a child. He also had the experience of being an official, so he had a kind of aura. As soon as these words came out of his mouth, Boss Sun felt a burst of pressure. But after all, as the owner of such a big restaurant, it was impossible to say that he did not have the ability to suppress his aura. Although he also knew that what he did today was a bit too much and wrong. But the situation was stronger than the person. When he thought of the master downstairs who insisted on this private room, he felt a headache coming. At this moment, he had to lower his head and explain. "I made a mistake. I forgot that this place was originally reserved. So today's meal is my treat. I'm sorry." "Treat us? Do you think you're worthy?" Yang said without hesitation. Originally, he thought that there was something fishy about this matter. Now that the other party said that the bill was free, he felt more confident in his heart. "Okay, Boss Sunday. Since you're in a difficult position, we won't argue with you. It just so happens that we're almost done eating, so we'll leave now." Yang Qindong finally spoke. Coming out to play was a mood. Now that the mood was ruined, even the best seats and scenery had lost their meaning at this moment. Since that was the case, it was better to leave and return to the inn. Chapter 335. Yang Qindong expressed his attitude. Although he was still angry and dissatisfied, he could only suppress it. He turned his head and snorted to express his dissatisfaction. Mr. Sun, on the other hand, kept bowing to Yang Qindong and thanking him. Then he turned around and led them downstairs in person. On the second floor of Xinglong Restaurant, 6 or 7 strong men were standing there and talking about something. From a distance, they seemed to be surrounding one of them and saying some flattering words. In Yang Qindong's life, this kind of thing couldn't be more insignificant. He didn't even want to take another look at it. However, there were many things in the world that had nothing to do with you even if you didn't want to. There were always some people who came to find you and could not be refused. Just like now, Yang Qindong and Mrs. Shui had walked past the corner of the second floor and went straight down to the first floor under the guidance of Mr. Sunday. Behind them, Hu Yan and Mrs. Shui followed. However, they seemed to be saying that their husband was lying. There was no such thing as White Lady and Su Xian here. When they talked about this, they couldn't help but chuckle. Just then, a gust of wind blew over and blew on Hu Yan's white veil. At a certain moment, the national beauty under the white veil was exposed. It happened to be seen clearly by a man in the crowd. It was not completely clear. He only knew that the woman was very beautiful and had very good skin. But this was enough. For many men, the more vague some things were, the more they could arouse their curiosity. If they could see through it at a glance, it would lose its original meaning. It was this glimpse that caused the man's heart to skip a beat. Then his body actually reacted in a primitive way. Perhaps he was used to such things, so he instinctively took a few hurried steps, passed through the crowd, and went straight to where Hu Yan and Mrs. Shui were. His reaction was not slow. Beta Persei, who was responsible for guarding Hu Yan and Mrs. Shui, instinctively reacted faster. When he felt a gust of wind, he had already stepped between the man who was about to do something. Scram! Suddenly, a tower-like man appeared in front of him. His figure was also very tall and sturdy, and he said this in an unfriendly manner. Then he threw a punch over. Wind whistled as the punch was unleashed. Just by listening to the sound, one could determine the power of this punch. Boom! Beta Persei, who had hurriedly returned a punch, stood there as steady as Mount Tai, as if the punch just now was not his arm at all. The man who threw out the first punch couldn't help but stagger. He took 2 steps back before stabilizing himself. At this moment, his eyes were filled with anger. Who was Qi? With his background, it could be said that he could do whatever he wanted in Hangzhou Prefecture. Not many people could control him. But now not only did someone stop him, he was even forced to take 2 steps back in the domain that he was most proud of. This was not as simple as just suffering a loss. It had reached the level of humiliation. Qi had another title, Hangzhou Divine Fist. But just now the punch he had thrown out was a preemptive strike. Yet, not only was it casually dispelled by someone else, the other party didn't even move an inch, but he was forced to take 2 steps back. This was somewhat inconceivable. What's going on? Master Qi. The commotion here finally attracted the attention of others. When they saw Qing's face alternating between white and red, the 7 men who were originally surrounding him and flattering him all gathered together. Then they glared angrily at Beta Persei, who was standing there motionless. If anger could kill, Beta Persei would have died countless times by now. Yang Qindong, who was walking in front, also heard the commotion behind him. Although he did not have eyes in the back of his head, and did not see what had just happened, he believed in Beta Persei. If the other party had not provoked him first, Beta Persei would never have made a move. While Yang Qindong was still thinking about what had happened, his 4th brother, Yang, had already strode over, shouting as he walked over. What's going on? Who ate the bear's heart and leopard's gall? Looking for trouble, huh? This was the way of the foppish. No matter what happened, it was always necessary to gain the upper hand by a show of strength. Perhaps if they were lucky, they could directly intimidate the other party into not daring to speak again. Then it would be much easier to solve the problem. Of course, people who dared to speak like this more or less had to have some background. Otherwise, there would always be a moment when they would be exposed and unable to continue pretending. Of course, Yang was considered to have some background. Putting everything else aside, just by mentioning his 6th brother's name, he could do whatever he wanted in the capital. There were not many people who were blind enough to offend him. But the capital was the capital after all, and this was Hangzhou. None of them knew Yang. Seeing that someone had suddenly walked over while shouting and charging straight at them, Qi, who had suffered at the hands of Beta Persei, had a flash of anger on his face. Then he suddenly gave up on the confrontation with Beta Persei, and changed his target to Yang, charging straight at him. Perhaps as a martial artist, he could tell that Yang was only good at talking, so he wanted to pick on the weaker one to show his strength. But what he did not know was that this time, he had picked the wrong opponent. Although Yang Qindong was not good at martial arts and only relied on brute force to fight, how could he let his 4th brother be at a disadvantage when Yang Qindong was here? Just as Qi suddenly rushed over, another figure had already rushed out first. Then with a bang, after a loud sound, a human figure continuously retreated until his body hit 2 tables in succession. Only then did he stop. Although his figure had stopped, he was still in an extremely sorry state. His originally clean clothes were stained with vegetable soup and oil, and he looked like a drowned rat. Standing opposite him was a young man who was not tall but had a very sturdy body. His eyes were cold, and at this moment he was squatting in a firm horse stance. His eyes were full of provocation. After being pushed back twice in a row, Qi only felt a sense of suffocation in his chest. Usually when he fought with people in Hangzhou, how many of them could withstand a few moves from him? Because of this, he gained the reputation of the Hangzhou Godly Fist. For this reason, he even founded a martial arts center called the Boxing Hall. Many people in the martial arts world would respectfully clasp their fists and greet him when they saw him, sect leader Qi. That was a very honorable thing to do. But today he had actually suffered 2 losses in a row in front of a group of people. He had lost to 2 different people, and both times he had gained the upper hand by striking first. How could this not make him angry? He felt that all the moves he had learned in the past seemed to have become useless. Qi, who had lost a lot of face, could not swallow this bitter fruit. He glanced at his friends who came with him, and evil grew from his guts. He pointed at Beta Persei and the others and shouted, "Everyone, let's go together and cripple them. If anything happens, I, Qi, will be responsible." The 7 people around him were all here for Qi. They more or less had something to ask of this person in the future. Now that their benefactor had spoken, there was no reason to not listen. They thought that this was Hangzhou, and everyone was more or less people of status. They were just a group of brave foreigners, so what was there to be afraid of? With this thought in mind, the 7 of them first exchanged glances across the air, then shouted and rushed toward Beta Persei and the others. And from the looks of it, 3 or 4 of them had learned martial arts. At least when they fought, their postures were very good. "Qiuvi, go easy on them. Don't kill them." Yang Chendong had already seen the situation clearly. Although he did not know the reason, these people had come to find fault with them again and again. Since that was the case, there was no need to be polite. He just needed to teach them a lesson. Qiuvi, who had defeated Qi earlier and whose eyes were filled with murderous intent, heard Yang Chendong's order. He immediately nodded, and then waved his hand. 7 people from the first guard team walked out to meet the 7 opponents who were shouting and rushing toward them. They were not equal in strength to begin with. When they fought, the situation was naturally one-sided. Among the 7 people, even the so-called martial arts master who had learned 2 styles could only block 1 move from the members of the Cold Front team. Then he was beaten up passively. The shouts of being beaten quickly spread throughout the 2nd floor of the restaurant. What happened here had already frightened the other diners. Those who were timid had already run out, leaving behind those who were bold. When they saw Qi being beaten up, they all ran away. This might be the influence of evil people, because Qi was an evil person, who knew if he would find trouble with those who saw him suffer after he recovered from his shock. All the unrelated people had run away, leaving only Boss Sun of Xinglong Restaurant. He was also helpless. The monk could run away, but the temple could not. It was probably describing people like him. Stop fighting. It's all a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Sect Master Qi is a person of status. You guys stop. Boss Sun tried to stop the fight, but he was afraid that he would be hurt. He pretended to go forward and shouted loudly, as if he wanted to use these words to scare the foreigners who came to his restaurant for the first time. In fact, there was no need for Boss Sun to shout. The members of the Cold Front team had already stopped. This kind of blindly beating people up did not feel good. It was like an adult facing a 3-year-old child. No matter how they beat, they would lose interest. Let's go. Yang Chendong could also see that this was not a fair fight. He shook his head disinterestedly. With Yang Chendong's words, the members of the Cold Front team naturally returned to their team. However, when they left the restaurant, everyone was clearly more vigilant. In the dark, the people from the security bureau had already seen everything. Then they began to carry out their activities. Chapter 336. There was a large courtyard in the East District of Hangzhou. This was one of the outer residences of the Chang clan, a wealthy merchant in the south. Chang Qianhao, as the eldest son of the Chang clan and the future head of the Chang clan, was carefully standing in front of the man in green clothes in the courtyard. Qianhao, there are no outsiders here, so you don't have to be so restrained. Standing in front of him was Yang Qindong. When he saw Chang Qianhao's serious and even somewhat nervous appearance, he tried to use words to enlighten him. The more he said this, the more nervous and cautious Chang Qianhao became. Master, the ancients said that a teacher for a day is a father for life. You have done a great favor for Chang Qianhao and the Chang clan. Okay. Knowing what he was going to say next, Yang Qindong gently patted his forehead and said helplessly, regarding the matter of handing over the Heavens Beyond Trading Company in the south to the Chang clan. As my student, you naturally have a certain connection, but more importantly, I still considered the strength of the Chang clan. Besides, not only your Chang clan but the other clans in the south also have resources allocated. This is originally a normal business, so you don't have to be so grateful to me. No. Master, the ratio of the Chang clan is the highest. For this matter, the grandfather in charge of the clan has already sent a letter to Qianhao, asking me to take care of Master's food and accommodation no matter what, but I don't know if there is anything that Master is dissatisfied with? No, everything is very good, very good. Yang Qindong chuckled. He could feel the admiration and gratitude of this student to him. Some of the rare goods of Heavens Beyond were indeed distributed to the Chang clan due to the fact that the other party was his student. However, he still couldn't accept such an action of greeting twice a day. Young Master Yang San is here. The timely appearance of Tiger's mane could be considered as a solution. Chang Qianhao had studied in the Yang Clan Academy for half a year, so he naturally knew that the identity of the person who came was not simple. He also knew that Yang Qindong had something important to do, so he respectfully took his leave and said that he would come to pay his respects before dinner. Chang Qianhao respectfully left. Yang Qindong didn't wait for Tiger's mane to speak and spoke first. Look after him. I don't have time to see him tonight, so he doesn't have to pay his respects. Oh. Tiger's mane wanted to laugh, but he didn't dare to. He naturally saw that because of Chang Qianhao's excessive enthusiasm, the young master was already vexed. All right, let Yang San in. Yang Qindong could see that he was gloating a little, but he also knew that there were some things that he ordered, and the other party would do very well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become his best confidant. Speaking of business, Tiger's man did not dare to be negligent in the slightest. He turned around and left. Yang Qindong soon followed him to Yang Qindong. Then some specific information about Qi Qing was sent to him. Hangzhou Divine Fist? Qi Bus Hen? Interesting. Yang Qindong's voice sounded from the courtyard with a smile that was not a smile. Hangzhou Government Office. In the backyard, a wailing sound came from one of the rooms. The sound was so loud that everyone in the courtyard became very cautious. A middle-aged man dressed in a fourth-rank official's robe was currently pacing back and forth in the courtyard. Perhaps it was due to his anxiety, but all the servants in the courtyard were extremely cautious, as if they were afraid that they would do something that they shouldn't do and provoke this official, resulting in them being severely punished. The man's name was Qi Bushen. He was the prefect of Hangzhou, a fourth-rank official. The wailing man in the room was Qi Qing, who was beaten up. He was also Qi Bushen's cousin. The two of them grew up together and had a very good relationship. When he returned with wounds all over his body, the entire estate was in chaos. The steward of the estate immediately invited a famous physician from Hangzhou Prefecture to examine his illness. The screams in the room earlier were probably due to the commotion caused by the palpation. Creak. The door of the room was pushed open from the inside. Then, the housekeeper accompanied a doctor who was carrying a medicine box and walked out. Qi Bushen, who saw all of this, quickly went up to the doctor and asked anxiously, "How is he?" Reporting to the prefect, sect leader Qi did not suffer any internal injuries. There is only one fracture and many bruises on his body. I'm afraid that he will need to rest for a period of time before he can recover, the doctor answered carefully. Oh, thank you. Men, double the consultation fee and send the doctor out. Qi Bushen waved his hand, and then entered the room with the housekeeper. Then he saw Qi Qing lying on the bed and whimpering softly. Noticing that someone had come, Qi Qing's voice became louder. When he saw that it was his cousin, his voice became even louder. He cried out in pain and said, "Cousin, you must avenge your younger brother." You don't know how arrogant the people on the other side were. They just said that they didn't like me and beat me up. When I asked them if they still cared about the law, they still ignored me. The guilty party complained first. All of this was reflected in Qi Qing's actions. And it seemed that Qi Bushen was very receptive to it. Bastards, they actually dare to ignore the laws of the great Ming dynasty. They are truly lawless. Housekeeper, immediately find out where those people are staying, and then order the bailiffs to arrest them. This official wants to see if they really have 3 heads and 6 arms and are really ignoring the laws. Since the master had said so, the housekeeper originally wanted to ask if they should investigate the other party's identity first. However, at this moment, he could only suppress these words in his heart. At this moment, he was unlucky and said something that he should not say. It was not a wise thing to do. If he did not do it well, he might even vent his anger on himself. How could Qi Bushen, who could become the prefect of Hangzhou and a 4th-rank official, be stupid? However, he still did not send anyone to investigate. It was all based on his strong self-confidence. He was the prefect of Hangzhou and the local emperor of this piece of land. With this kind of power, how many people could make him feel afraid? Not to mention, he also had a very strong backer. Even if there were some problems, he was the kind of person who would protect him. Based on these 2 points, he was naturally fearless. He wanted to let those who hurt his cousin know that the Qi family was not in existence that anyone could provoke. The housekeeper went out and quickly found that those who hit Qi Qing were living in the outer residence of the Chang family. When he found out about these things, the housekeeper felt confident. Although the Chang family was very rich, they were after all just businessmen. Since ancient times, people did not fight with officials. How could they be a match for the officials? Feeling confident, the housekeeper found his relative, Niu Ji, who was arranged to be a constable in the prefect of Hangzhou. Niu Ji's nickname was Niu Heir. It was because he was the 2nd son in the family that he got this name. Since he was young, his body was better than others. Later on, he learned martial arts from a famous teacher for a few years. After he learned martial arts, he found the housekeeper's relative and was arranged to be the head of the constables in the prefectural government. With the housekeeper's help, naturally, this constable's life was smooth. This time there was a good thing again. Of course, he would not forget Niu Ji. When Niu Ji received the housekeeper's order, he knew that this was a good job to please the prefectural government. He did not dare to be tough. Immediately, he led a group of constables to the outer residence of the Chang family. At this time, the outer residence of the Chang family was shrouded in darkness. It seemed to be very quiet, but in fact in the darkness, there were many pairs of eyes staring at this place. During the day, they beat someone in Xinglong restaurant. It was said that they had some influence in the local area. According to the rule that caution was the parent of safety, Tiger's Mane had arranged for people to wait for a long time. Reality proved that this waiting was not in vain. Not long after nightfall, there was a burst of noisy footsteps on the street in the distance. Then a walking fire dragon came straight in this direction. That was the state when the bailiffs of the manor walked with torches. They're coming, they're coming. They're all ready. Once the order is given, we'll start immediately. Tigerhead, Tiger Ray's nickname, said that we have to be quick and clean. Yang Wu's voice came out. This time, Yang Si and Yang Lu were left behind in Yang village, and the capital to be in charge of the work there. He was lucky to be brought out. Seeing that there was a battle to fight, he was very excited. With Yang Wu as the leader, they borrowed a platoon of Lungfeng from Wuxing camp. In addition, there was the cooperation of the 2nd Guard, Dao Xiao, and the Ghost Shadow Sniper team in the dark to deal with any unexpected situations. With such a lineup, not to mention some constables and constables of the prefectural government, even if a few hundred Ming soldiers came, they would not be afraid at all. The fire dragon came closer and closer. The one at the front holding a torch was the constable Niu Ji. When he saw the outer residence of the Chang family from afar, he waved his hand majestically and said, "Go, surround them. Remember, don't let anyone escape." Niu Ji's voice was not soft. He was not worried that such a shout would scare them away. This might be his arrogance and conceit. However, regardless of whether he was careless or cautious, he was destined to suffer tonight. Just like now, when Nyoji's voice sounded, the 20 or so constables and constables were about to split up. Suddenly, the surroundings lit up. High-voltage flashlights were suddenly turned on. When dozens of light beams shone on them, it made them feel as if they were instantly blinded. What's going on? Nyoji raised his right hand to block his eyes that were temporarily blinded by the light, and asked casually. Even at this moment, he did not know that he had already become a fish on the chopping block in the eyes of others. Pa! Clang! Clang! Ouch! All kinds of painful cries rose and fell at this moment. Each of the constables and constables who were like wolves and tigers a moment ago had turned into soft-footed shrimps. Some of them bent over and fell to the ground, wailing in pain. Among them, Nyoji was the one who received the most attention. Just now, after he shouted out, "What's going on?" he suddenly heard a gust of wind. As someone who had practiced martial arts, he instinctively stepped back. However, he only took one step back before he was suddenly tripped by something. Then he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Based on his intuition, he knew that someone had stepped on him. Chapter 337. This kick might not have been as heavy as 1,000 pounds, but it made him lose the ability to resist in an instant. Even he, the leader, was beaten to the ground in an instant. It was conceivable that the other brothers would not have a good time. The Lung Feng soldiers made their move. They originally had a thorough plan. Since they had encountered some people who had underestimated them, how could they be courteous? Naturally, they greeted them with a good beating. Waves of cudgels came down. If it was not for the fact that they did not have the intention to kill, the more than 20 people who had come would have all died here. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, the one-sided beating slowly stopped. Nyoji and the others were already covered in wounds, and no longer had the arrogant appearance they had before. Come on, tie them up. If anyone refuses to submit, just serve them with cudgels. Yang Wu stood in the crowd, his voice filled with pride. This time he did not act impulsively. Hu Tu had said that this was the young master's order. Since he had received the order, if he did not exercise his fist properly, wouldn't he be wasting the mission and opportunity Hu Tu had given him? After the order was given, the Lung Feng soldiers took out the ropes that they had prepared earlier and started to work. However, the expected resistance did not happen. Perhaps they were really afraid of being beaten. Since ancient times, soldiers had always been used to catch thieves. Since when had thieves ever caught soldiers? And they just happened to encounter it. Who would be so stupid as to shout and scream? Soon, the originally noisy street became quiet again. If someone were to pass by this place at this time, they would never think that the dozens of officers had just been violently beaten up here. Yang Wu and the others were still staring with their eyes wide open, waiting for the enemy to come. According to their thinking, the sudden disappearance of more than 20 officials who had been sent out would cause a commotion. It was even reasonable that the Ming Dynasty's Hangzhou City Guard Association would take action. Unfortunately, one night had passed. When the sky began to brighten, indicating the arrival of a new day, there was still no movement. This made Yang Wu really disappointed. Back to the Qi residence, Qi Bushin's residence. Early in the morning, he was still hugging his concubine to sleep when suddenly, the housekeeper's shouting voice came from outside. "Master, it's not good. It's not good, master." What happened? Qi Bushen, who had just woken up from his dream, got up from his bed with a face full of displeasure. He casually put on a piece of clothing and opened the bedroom door. Then, he scolded the housekeeper who was yelling outside. "Old master is fine, but you are disturbing his sleep early in the morning. What are you trying to do? I'm telling you, if you don't give me a reason, I won't let you off today. Master, it's not good." Nyoji and the rest did not return for the entire night. I wonder where they went. Could he have been killed by those people? The housekeeper did not listen to what Qi Bushen had to say. Instead, he spoke in a panic. Last night, after assigning Nyoji an errand, he came back to sleep. This was not the first time he had done such a task. All he had to do was to issue the order, and then get up in the morning to see the results. However, when he went to the magistrate's office in the morning, he found out that Nyoji and more than 20 other people had disappeared from the face of the earth. They were nowhere to be found. The bailiffs who stayed behind thought that Constable Nyo had something important to do and needed to go somewhere far away, so they didn't see him for the whole night and didn't report to him. When the housekeeper heard the news, he immediately panicked. The Chang family's courtyard was in Hangzhou Prefecture City and was not far from the magistrate's office. It would take at most half an hour to get there. How could they not return for the whole night? His intuition told him that something must have happened. At that moment, he ran back to the Qi family's mansion and woke up his master. Initially, Qi Bushin's face was still full of anger. However, after hearing the housekeeper's words, he was stunned. After a few breaths, he finally reacted and exclaimed loudly, "How is this possible? How is this possible? Master, it's true. Those people must be very daring. Master, it's been a night. No one knows what will happen. Why don't we report it to the magistrate?" The housekeeper was so frightened that he was incoherent. He stood there trembling as he made his suggestion. "Report it to the magistrate? Bastard, Master is the magistrate." Qi Bushen was so angry that he couldn't help but curse. No, Master. What I meant was to report to the Hangzhou guards and have them send troops into the city. Perhaps only with their appearance will we be able to suppress those daring criminals. The butler realized that he had made a slip of the tongue. After correcting himself, he hurriedly replied. After being reminded, Qi Bushin's originally panicked expression flashed with joy. However, he shook his head. No way. This is a serious matter. We still need to investigate it clearly. If it's a misunderstanding, then it will be a big joke. Once the Hangzhou guards were alerted and the army was mobilized, the matter would inevitably be reported to Nanjing. If it really alarmed the emperor and the imperial court, there would not be much room for negotiation. Qi Bushen shook his head and decided to clarify the matter first. The so-called clarification of the matter naturally fell on the housekeeper's head. The housekeeper naturally had a headache about this task. However, since it was his master who said it, he certainly did not dare to refuse. After agreeing, he rushed back to the magistrate's office. After returning to the magistrate's office, the housekeeper selected another 20 bailiffs and 4 constables who had learned martial arts. They went straight to the Chang family's residence. This time it was broad daylight. He did not believe that anyone would dare to do anything to him. Of course, he was not unprepared. When he left a message in the magistrate's office. If he did not return in 2 hours, he was to inform his master and send troops to rescue him. Being prepared did not guarantee that he would not be afraid. He still felt a little uneasy when he arrived at the Chang family's residence. Unexpectedly, the door was already open. It was as if they knew that someone would come. When they saw the team he brought from afar, a man with a smile on his face came up to greet them. "May I know who you are? Please tell me." The other party was so polite that the housekeeper did not dare to force him. He thought that it would be impolite not to reciprocate. He clasped his fist and said, "I am the housekeeper of the magistrate of Hangzhou. My surname is Wu." "Housekeeper?" The person in front of him did not wait for him to finish his words. He shook his head and said, "With all due respect, this matter is not something that a housekeeper like you can shoulder. You should go back and ask your master to come here personally." After he finished speaking, the person in charge of welcoming the guest turned around and left. It was obvious that he was a little unhappy. Steward Wu knew that his status was still a little low, but since he was already here, he couldn't possibly not get to the bottom of things, right? He rushed towards the other party's departing figure and shouted, "Hey, are Nyoji and the others in your hands? What did you do to them?" "Nyoji? Haha, you mean the one who was beaten into a pig's head. If you want to know what happened to him, ask your master to come here personally." The man did not even turn his head. His figure gradually disappeared. After he returned to the residence, he closed the door. The man was Yang Wu. He was asked by the 6th young master to welcome the guest outside the door. He originally thought that the person who came would be the magistrate of Hangzhou. If the magistrate was sensible, it would not be a big deal. However, the person who came was just a housekeeper. Under the difference in status, there were many things that could not be discussed. Finally, he received news about Nyoji and the others. After confirming that it was the other party who did it, the housekeeper turned around and left. His face was no longer nervous and fearful. Instead, it was burning with anger. How dare they detain the officials? Based on this alone, the other party was doomed. Half an hour later, the Hangzhou guard station nearby made their move. With 200 cavalrymen in the lead, 500 infantrymen followed closely behind. The large group of people entered Hangzhou from the southern city. They galloped on the streets, causing a lot of chaos. The commander of the Hangzhou guards, Tong Qiao, had a total of 5,600 people under him. The first 1,000 people under him had a total of 1,200 people under him. There were 1,000 people under him. They were usually in charge of the security around Hangzhou. Although they were in charge of security, there were not many things that could make them take action. Unless there was an enemy invading from the sea, most of the time, they were just idling around. This time, they suddenly received a request from the magistrate, Qi Bushen. He said that a group of evildoers had appeared in the city. They had actually detained more than 20 officials privately. It seemed that they had also used some tricks. When the news first came, Tong Qiao did not hear it clearly. Of course, he did not dare to believe it. This was the world of the Great Ming Dynasty. The officials represented the image of the country. How could someone dare to harm them? Could it be that they were not afraid of the law? Or could it be that the status of these people was so high that they could do things without any scruples? However, the next news made Tong Qiao dispel this thought. It was said that the group of evildoers lived in the courtyard of the Chang family, a wealthy merchant in the south. This alone made him feel relieved. It was still the same sentence. The status of merchants was still very low at that time. If they were really people with status, how could they be willing to live in the courtyard of a merchant? It would only lower their status. Even if they were powerless people, Tong Qiao did not mind picking a soft persimmon to pinch. It just so happened that his brothers had not made money for a long time. This was a good opportunity. If it was done well, it would be a big income. Speaking of which, it was the Chang family. It was said that their wealth was comparable to that of a country. As a result, a group of 700 Great Ming soldiers entered the city in a mighty manner. There were already bailiffs from the government office waiting to lead the way. Then the group of people arrived outside the Chang family's courtyard and surrounded it. Guard the front and back doors. No one is allowed to slip away. In a while, when this general gives the order, everyone just needs to rush forward. If anyone dares to resist, use your weapons. Tong Qiao, who was riding on a horse and wearing armor, could be said to be majestic. Under his command, the Chang family's courtyard was soon surrounded by people that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Then, the 200 soldiers of the Great Ming Dynasty bravely walked toward the main door. They were in a row of 10 people. Every time they took a step forward, they would shout. Not to mention that their voices were very uniform, there was some momentum. Chapter 338. In the garden of the Chang family's courtyard. Small bridges, flowing water, lush green grass, mesmerizing flowers, colorful purples, pavilions, and painted rafters. All of them were the work of famous craftsmen. It was just a side courtyard, but it was already so luxurious. It could be seen that the Chang family was indeed rich and imposing. In the middle of the garden there was a pavilion. On the stone table below, there were various fruits and snacks. A young man and an old man were sitting there, drinking tea and chatting. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, we haven't seen each other for nearly 2 years. On the other side of the table, an old man wearing an ordinary long robe had a smile on his face. He seemed to be in a good mood. Sir Kuei is still as elegant as ever. Congratulations. Yang Chendong also had a smile on his face. As he spoke, he raised the teacup in his hand. Haha, Duke of Loyalty and Courage must be joking. I still have to thank you for everything. If it weren't for you turning the tide on the battlefield back then, I'm afraid this old man would have been buried long ago. Thank you. Old man Kuang Yi also raised the wine in his arms and sighed with an emotional expression. In the Battle of the Tuma Fortress, because of Wang Zhen's careless command. The morale of the army was in chaos and they were defeated by Walla's army. The officials were either dead or running away. It was complete chaos. At this time, Yang Chendong, who was inconspicuous in the team, stood up and successively saved the 9 important ministers of the imperial court. Later, he even saved the besieged Emperor Zhu Qizhen. Among the 9 officials there was Kuang Yi. In the past he was the Minister of War of the Great Ming Dynasty. Now he was the Minister of War of the Southern Ming Dynasty. It was said that he was trusted by Emperor Yingzong. This time he was ordered by the emperor to check the situation of the various imperial guards. Coincidentally, he learned that Yang Chendong had returned to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. Thus, he rushed here early in the morning to meet him. Although it was a coincidence, Yang Chendong had already asked around. Kuang Yi was a good old man. Although he was a little old, he still had some ability. To be able to meet him here and settle some matters was within his plan. At this moment, the two of them were able to meet each other as they wished. Furthermore, they had saved each other's lives as a bond. It could be said that both the host and the guest were extremely happy. However, this harmonious scene was disrupted by the battle cries outside the courtyard. Although Kuang Yi was a little older, his eyes were not blurry and his ears were not deaf. He could naturally hear the shouts outside clearly. He frowned and raised his head to look at Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong, who had long been paying attention to Kuang Yi's actions, smiled and said, "Hee, I don't know why I was targeted yesterday. Some people came to find trouble with me, but they were caught by my subordinates. They must have mobilized the army this time." Nonsense. Who gave them the authority to mobilize the army for something as big as that? Guaning, go take a look. Kuang Yi said with a straight face. This time he didn't come to see Yang Chendong just to catch up. He came with a mission. However, before he even had the chance to ask for help, his own people had already dropped the ball. If he didn't handle things well, it would directly affect his mission. How could he not be angry? Guaning was 7 feet tall and had a powerful body. His muscles seemed like they would explode with power at any time. At a glance, one could tell that he was a martial artist. Of course, the reason why Kuang Yi arranged for him to go out was not only because he was his trusted aide, but also because he was an official of the Ministry of War. He was selected to be the vice director of the Department for Purging Officials, and was a standard 5th rank official. The Department for Purging Officials was an organization under the Ministry of War during the Ming and Qing dynasties. It was responsible for the rank, selection, promotion, and rewards of the military officials. It was responsible for inspecting the strategic locations of various regions and setting up camps. It was also responsible for managing the inheritance and bestowments of the tribal officials who lived in communities of ethnic minorities. Most of the time, the rank of an official in the Great Ming Dynasty wasn't enough. The most important thing was how much power he had. For example, the first Grand Secretary of the Imperial Cabinet was equivalent to the Emperor's personal secretary. For example, Jie Jin during the Ming Dynasty was a standard 5th rank official. Don't underestimate a standard 5th rank official. Even in front of the Emperor he could speak. He was much more powerful than a standard 4th or 3rd rank official. For example, Guaning was only a standard 5th rank official. However, because he controlled the promotion and rewards of the military officials, he had great power. Even many of the commanders, standard 3rd rank officials, of the City Guard Institute and the Capital Guard Institute had to lower their heads and smile apologetically when they saw him. Since the Capital Guard Institute had been mobilized, it was appropriate to send Guaning to take a look. Yang Chendong was naturally aware of this. He immediately smiled and said politely, "Then I'll have to trouble you, Vice Director Guan." "You're too polite." Guan Ying's expression didn't change. After saying this with a serious face, he bowed to Kuang Yi and left. After Guaning left, Kuang Yi's laughter sounded again. "Duke of Loyalty, please don't mind him. This person's personality is like this. He doesn't smile much, but he is very serious and has some ability. Yes, to be able to learn from Lord Kuang, he is without a doubt a talent." Yang Chendong also smiled and flattered. Then he raised the teacup in his hand. With Guaning taking care of the outside matters, he naturally didn't have to worry. Kwang Yi also smiled and raised his teacup. After taking a sip, he put it down and said, Duke of Loyalty, a while ago the Japanese suddenly invaded the border and attacked the Tianjin Guard. I'm sure you've heard about it. Yes, this matter caused a lot of disputes in the Beiming imperial court. How could I not know about it? Yang Qindong seemed to be casually nodding, but in fact, only he knew that Kwang Yi had finally begun to talk about the main topic. Yes. I heard that 20,000 soldiers and 20,000 commoners were captured. How could the Duke of Yu not be angry about such a big matter? Kwang Yi seemed to sigh. Then he continued, I heard that even now, the Japanese warriors often appear between the Tianjin Guard and the capital. Duke of Loyalty, you are going to pass by that place. Have you met them? Yang Qindong didn't express any dissatisfaction with Kwang Yi calling the Daizong Emperor Yu Wang. Originally, Zhu Qiyu was the Duke of Yuwang. If it weren't for the change of Tu Mu, he wouldn't have become the emperor. As a follower of Zhu Qizhen, it wasn't strange that Kwang Yi didn't admit this. However, to ask about the Japanese warriors and whether he had met them was somewhat interesting. No, this duke was lucky and didn't meet them. Haha, yes, the Duke of Loyalty's luck has always been very good. Saving Yuwang, retreating from the Walla, building the bank and so on. Everything went too smoothly, right? When he uttered the last word, Kwang Ye's gaze suddenly sharpened as he looked at Yang Qindong. Feeling the coldness of the gaze, which seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, Yang Qindong didn't even lift his eyelids and smiled. Yes, the heavens are good to me. A calm and confident smile flashed across Yang Qindong's face. In Kwang Ye's eyes, all of this made him feel unreal. Kwang Yi wasn't young. In the imperial court, he was second only to Hu Xiao. He was also a man in his 60s. He had interacted with Yang Qindong many times, but even at that time, he only had a trace of respect for him. He didn't feel as powerless as he did when facing Yang Qindong. The young man in front of him was only in his early 20s, but he felt as if he was even more difficult to deal with than his father, Yang Rong. It seemed that no matter how he probed and provoked the young man was like an impenetrable wall. Under the pavilion, it suddenly became quiet. At this moment, only a gentle breeze flashed in front of them. Of course, in their hearts, they were weighing each other's words. Their chests were heavily panting, and their minds were working quickly. Ha ha, ha ha ha, the Duke of Loyalty's luck is indeed very good, and you are also very talented. This old man has seriously studied the snow of the Yang family that you rode in front of the Yang family academy. It is truly majestic and enlightening, but I don't know how to interpret the phrase, a man of great talent. Although because of Yang Qindong, the great Ming dynasty was divided into the south and many officials and soldiers belonged to two different imperial courts, one thing remained unchanged. That was, the poetry that scholars liked was still the same. Thinking back, when the snow of the Yang family was spread to the capital of the southern imperial court, Nanjing, it caused a huge uproar. When many people were sighing at the grandeur of this poem and were amazed by the sentences, it was inevitable that they would wonder what kind of environment and inner thoughts the author of this poem, Yang Qindong, was in to create such a song that could be passed down. There were even some people who began to research the specific meaning of the phrase. Especially the phrase to count the outstanding figures. There were even more explanations for it. For example, the people of the Ying sect who were hostile to the Dai sect explained that Yang Qindong was flattering Zhu Qiyu, saying that Zhu Qiyu's ascension was justified, legitimate, and reasonable. They said that he was a man of great talent, and Zhu Qizhen was not. There were also some people who were envious, jealous, and hateful who explained that this sentence meant that Yang Qindong looked down on all scholars in the world. It was a manifestation of his own arrogance. There were also some people who wanted to see the world in chaos who said that this meant that someone wanted to replace Yang Qindong. They were implying that Yang Qindong was a traitor like Cao Cao. Among these opinions, Kwang Yi was more inclined to the latter, but he didn't say this to anyone. As the Minister of War, he, who knew soldiers well, was shocked when he saw the calm performance of the cold front soldiers on the battlefield. With such outstanding soldiers, any one of them would be qualified to be a squad leader, or even a centurion, or even a general of a higher rank. But they were willing to work under Yang Qindong. What did this mean? Chapter 339. Even though there were rumors that those people were mercenaries and that Yang Chendong was willing to spend a lot of money to hire them, Yi Chendong did not believe it. Others might believe such a reason, but Kuang Yi would never believe it no matter what. It was because he had led soldiers before and knew the importance of elite soldiers. At least in front of him, if he had such elite soldiers, he would never give them to others, even if the other party offered a high price. Not to mention, with such elite soldiers, what kind of money could he not earn? Why would he need to hire them? He had such thoughts at the beginning, but because he was indebted to someone for saving his life, he naturally could not criticize them in front of them or behind their backs. But as time passed, these elite mercenaries had been following Yang Chendong all this time, and this suspicion became heavier and heavier. What he said just now was just to test and confirm. Unfortunately, he did not get a good result, which made him a little disappointed. At the same time, he also wondered if Yi Chendong was speechless and wanted to gloss over it. While Kuang Yi was thinking about this, Yang Chendong spoke. Sir Ji, do you mind if I tell you a story? Oh, I'm all ears. Kuang Yi did not know what the other party meant, but he still smiled and agreed out of politeness. Moreover, with Yang Chendong's talent, even an ordinary story would be quite interesting in his mouth. Seeing that Kuang Yi agreed, Yang Chendong first smiled politely, then opened his mouth and said, Once upon a time, there was a scholar who wanted to go out for a walk because he was tired of studying at home. Unexpectedly, he encountered an injured man who had fainted. Out of kindness, he saved the man and found a doctor to treat him. Not long after, the man's body recovered. When he left, he said that he wanted to repay his kindness. At this point, the corners of Yang Chendong's mouth curled up slightly, giving people the feeling that he was recalling something interesting, but only he knew that he was laughing at the absurdity and nonsense of this story. It was all because this was indeed a story, a fabricated story. The man said that he wanted to repay his kindness, so of course the scholar did not care. It was just a casual effort and he did not take it seriously. But who would have thought that not long after, the burly man would fulfill his promise? Not only did he send a lot of gold and silver, he also sent a lot of people to protect the scholar. He said that the scholar had saved his life, so seeing the scholar was like seeing himself. At this point of the story, Yang Chendong suddenly closed his mouth. After a few breaths he said again, From then on, this scholar naturally gets whatever he wants. Now that I think about it, if it wasn't the heavens taking care of him, then what was? When the story finally came to an end, Kuang Yi fell into silence. From the beginning of the story he thought of something. When the story came to an end, he finally understood that this so-called story was actually a fact. The scholar must be Yang Chendong, and the man he saved must be the leader of the mercenaries. If that was the case, everything made sense. This was also the main reason why the mercenaries could be used by Yang Chendong. But, is this true? If the leader of the mercenaries was so powerful, why would he appear in front of Yang Chendong in an injured state? This did not seem to make sense. Since today's story had reached this point, Kuang Yi naturally had to ask clearly, so he asked all the questions in his heart. Lord Kuang, good question. At that time, the scholar was also a little confused, but he slowly learned from the elite soldiers that the burly man he had saved had been plotted against because he was trying to snatch the position of the boss. That was why he had escaped all the way to the city where the scholar lived. Later, he recovered from his injuries and went back to take back everything. That was how simple it was. Yang Chendong spread out his hands and smiled at Kuang Yi. Since he wanted to tell a story, how could he not have thought about it from the beginning to the end? The story was not exciting, but it was still passable. At this moment, Kuang Yi did not know what to say. Should he continue to question him? But he already explained it to him. If he continued to ask, he would be accused of pestering endlessly. As expected, before Kuang Yi could continue, Yang Chendong said, Lord Kuang, to be honest, I have never told anyone about this before. You are the first, so if possible, I hope you can keep it a secret for me. As soon as he said this, Kuang Yi was completely speechless. The other party had put on such a sincere appearance, and had even saved his life. What else could he ask? No matter what, he was still an educated person. He couldn't possibly be so shameless as to throw away his basic dignity. At this moment, the only thing he could do was nod his head and accept the favor. Thank you for your loyalty. This old man was too rash. Sigh, Lord Kwong, please don't say that. Everyone is curious. If it was me, I might ask too. It's fine, it's fine. Haha, drink tea, drink tea. Yang Chendong said with a laugh and put on a kind face. Outside the Chang residence, Tong Qiao aggressively led his men to surround this place, and then commanded his men to start approaching step by step. From the looks of it, it seemed that a big battle was unavoidable. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before this place would be littered with corpses. However, just when everyone was extremely nervous, the originally tightly shut door of the Chang family's courtyard suddenly opened from the inside. Then, a sturdy man appeared in front of everyone. Prepare to charge. Stop. All of you stop. Tong Qiao, who was about to give the order, was ready to let the soldiers charge. However, when he saw the person who appeared, his mouth first formed an O shape, and then he shouted loudly at his men, as if he was afraid that someone would suddenly attack. The sudden shout stunned the soldiers of the great Ming Dynasty, who were full of morale. At this moment, Tong Qiao had already dismounted from his horse and trotted over. When he reached the front door, and saw that the person in front of him was indeed Minister Councillor Guaning, he hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. Lord Guan. General Tong, what is the meaning of this? After Guaning cupped his hands and bowed, he pointed at the rows of great Ming Dynasty soldiers who had already appeared outside the door. This question made Tong Qiao's expression change greatly. He originally thought that there was a villain here, and that the magistrate of Hangzhou had asked for help. He thought that since this was related to the Chang residents, it would be a good opportunity to take advantage of them. At that time, he could casually ask for tens of thousands of silver taels. He did not expect that Guaning would appear here. Although Guan Ying's official rank was not as high as his, he held great power. He was the kind of person who could not be offended. In particular, he had heard that Guaning was the favorite student of the current Minister of War, Kuang Yi. The city guard's office was also under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of War. When he thought of this, he broke out in a cold sweat. What's wrong? Is the weather very hot? General Tong, why are you sweating so much? Guan Ying's expression was still very serious. When he said these words, it did not seem like he was concerned, but more like he was questioning something. This. Tong Qiao rolled his eyes. He knew that it would be stupid to hide the truth at this time. He immediately gritted his teeth and confessed Qi Bushen. It was because Magistrate Qi of Hangzhou said that there were rebels here, so he asked me to lead the soldiers into the city to eliminate them. Rebels? Did they disturb the villagers? Did they occupy the city? Did it cause any chaos? Guaning asked one question after another. According to the regulations of the Ministry of War, if there were rebels in the city and caused great chaos, the city guard's office and the nearby city guard's office had the right to mobilize the army into the city. On the contrary, even if the local officials asked for it, they could not enter the city without permission. This was originally a way to control the army, to prevent them from doing anything out of line. Guaning asked these questions based on this basis. Guaning was doing his job according to the rules. Tong Qiao's face turned pale. At this moment, he hated Qi Bushen to death. If it wasn't for the fact that he made the situation sound very serious, and even said that there were profits to be made by entering the city, and that after the matter was over, he could just grab a few people and report to his superiors that it was a mess, and that would be the end of the matter. Then he wouldn't have the guts to bring his army into the city. Now, not only did he not get any benefits, but he was also caught red-handed. It was conceivable that if this matter was not handled well, he would lose his official position. Although the official rank of the person in front of him was not as high as his, he was in charge of the examination. If he did not clarify the matter, he was afraid that when the person returned to the capital, he would be locked up and questioned. Since he had done something wrong, he had to accept the punishment. Tong Qiao was a straightforward person. Since he could not find a good reason, he lowered his head and said, Lord Guan, I acted rashly and believed the words of others. I was wrong. Tong Qiao admitted his mistake so straightforwardly. A gratified smile flashed across Guan Ying's face. No matter what, it was good to know one's mistake and be able to change. Let the soldiers retreat. General Tong, please come with me. Tong Qiao thought that Guan Ying wanted to discuss the conditions with him in private. There was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He quickly agreed and let the soldiers withdraw, leaving only 2 bodyguards to wait outside. While he was still thinking about what conditions Tong Qiao would discuss with him, and whether he should agree to them, the 2 of them had already arrived at the pavilion in the middle of the residence. Tong Qiao, who was about to continue apologizing, finally saw Guan Yi, who was wearing a long gown and sitting there. When he first saw him, Tong Qiao thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He even rubbed his eyes hard. When he recognized that the other party was indeed the Minister of War, Guan Yi, he was stunned. It would be better if Guan Ying was the only one who knew about the deployment of troops. Although Guan Ying's authority was not small, he was still an official. As long as he gave Guan Ying a way out, there would be room for negotiation. However, if the Minister of War met him, then things would be different. Guan Ying was the superior who was in charge of him. If Guan Ying's upper lip touched his lower lip, his future would be completely ruined. Chapter 340. Plop. Tong Qiao knelt down in front of Guan Yi. The moment Tong Qiao knelt on the ground, Guan Ying walked to Guan Ye's side and whispered the story of what had happened. Originally, Guan Ye's expression didn't change as he sat there, but when he heard the last part of the story, his anger rose. After he heard the entire story, he was so angry that he fiercely slammed the stone table and said, "What a bunch of bastards! Where did they put the Great Ming's military law?" Needless to say, he was criticizing Qi Bushen. After saying this, he looked up at Yang Chendong and his expression returned to normal. Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I'm really sorry for making a fool of myself in front of you. Haha. Yang Chendong's lips curled into a smile. He didn't say anything. Perhaps at this moment, it wasn't appropriate to say anything. You guys go out and wait. I will talk to the Duke of Loyalty for a while. Guan Yi waved his hand and dismissed Guan Ying and Tong Qiao. Tong Qiao, who was nervous, bowed his head and left the courtyard. When Guan Yi was out of sight, he carefully asked, Lord Guan, is the Duke of Loyalty that Minister Guang mentioned the one in the north? Well, do you know how big of a mess you almost made this time? Guan Ying nodded his head. When he spoke, the accusation in his voice became more and more obvious. In his heart, he was somewhat unconvinced by the Duke of Loyalty, especially when he saw the real person. He found that the real person was so young and did not have 3 heads and 6 arms. There was a trace of contempt in his heart. It was just that Guang Yi was his teacher, and also his superior. Even his teacher respected the other party so much, so he could not do anything against him. After receiving Guan Ying's accurate answer, cold sweat flowed down his neck. Tong Qiao had long heard of the Duke of Loyalty. This person not only saved the life of the current emperor, Ingzong, but also defeated the elite Walla army. When he thought about how he almost made such a person his opponent, a chill ran down his spine. It really scared him. Under the pavilion, after there was no one else around, Guang Yi couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Loyal Duke, I'm not afraid of you laughing at me. You also saw that this is our great Ming Dynasty's army. What do you mean that he was bewitched by Magistrate Qi of Hangzhou? It's just that he wanted to enter the city to take advantage of us. The fact that Guang Yi could see through the matter at a glance was enough to prove that this was not the first time something like this had happened. It also proved that his mind was clear. However, Yang Chendong still didn't reply because he knew that the other party didn't come here just for a simple meeting. There should be a deeper meaning. As for what it was, he had a rough guess. He was waiting for the other party to say it. Or it could be said that he was waiting for a good price. Yang Chendong didn't say anything, but Guang Yi didn't mind. Instead, he continued. Duke Zhongdan, to be honest, the situation in the south isn't good. Especially after Zhu Huihua's rebellion caused the Miao people's chaos. Now there's also the chaos in Guangdong. It has already affected several cities and more than a dozen counties. Oh, when did this happen? Yang Chendong had been paying attention to the situation in Guangdong. According to history, this would happen after the chaos in Guangdong. Last year's chaos in Guangdong had already been quelled, but Huang Yuliang had escaped. This time it was the chaos in Guangdong after his father Huang Xiaoyang. According to the records, Huang Yuliang was the first to raise his army. However, because of his arrival, Zhu Huihua rebelled first. This was somewhat different from history. I just received an urgent message this morning. As Kuang Yi spoke, he took out a memorial from his arms and handed it to Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong didn't reach out to accept Kuang Yi's kindness. Instead, he waved his hand and said, "Lord Kuang, I don't need to read these. You also know that I'm Baiming's subject. Now my family, foundation, and even my wife are there. Don't harm me." "Ai, how can you say that? You saved the emperor's life. The earliest title of Duke Zhongdan was given by Emperor Yingzong. How can you say that you're Baiming's subject?" Kuang Yi looked like he was seriously trying to reason with him. Okay, Lord Kuang, there's no need to be so clear about this. This time, I'm only returning to my hometown to worship my ancestors. I really don't want to get involved in other things. Besides, Lord Kuang just said that the great Ming Dynasty's army is mixed. I'm not an immortal, so how can I help Emperor Yingzong? Yang Chendong waved his hand, showing that he didn't want to continue the conversation. You're not an immortal, but you have a good relationship with the mercenaries. This old man has seen their elegance long ago. They're really the elites of the elites. I'm sure that with their help, the problem will be easily solved. Kuang Yi used this opportunity to finally talk about the main topic. He wanted to use the mercenaries to fight, quell the rebellion, and solve the bandit chaos in the south. Aya, this is making things difficult for me. The number of mercenaries is limited. Moreover, the money needed to hire them is a large number. Can the current imperial court take out that much money? Yang Chendong still refused, but in reality, both sides were testing each other. The southern Ming dynasty was a country that Zhu Qizhan had no choice but to settle for the next best thing. Because everything was forced, the resources that could be obtained were limited. The amount of gold and silver that could be taken from the national treasury was even less. Although in the past year, the situation of the imperial court was much better than when it was first established due to the wealth of the south, it was still far from being able to support two large wars. Yang Chendong said that the cost of hiring the mercenaries was too great. His Majesty really can't take out that much gold and silver. Kuang Yi lowered his head when he said this, but he quickly raised his head again. With an excited expression he said, "But isn't there the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? As long as you're willing to vouch for him, that person owes you his life. No matter what, this face has to be given. And as long as we can quell these two rebellions, the imperial court will be able to collect a lot of taxes in less than 5 years. At that time, it won't be a problem to pay the mercenaries enough money. What do you think?" "What do you think?" Yang Chendong bluntly refused. This was clearly Kuang Yi trying to gain something without risking anything. What 5 years? Who knew what would happen in 5 years? If Kuang Yi wasn't here by then, who would he ask for the money? He would never do such a strenuous and thankless job. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is a kind person. Could it be that you're just going to watch the people in the south suffer the pain of war, and have their families destroyed? Otherwise, the mercenaries can send out troops and take away anything they like along the way. How about that? As he spoke, Kuang Yi finally revealed a part of his trump card. Speaking of which, after the Ming dynasty experienced the rule of Ren Xian, the people were still very rich. Especially the aristocratic families and those rich businessmen. There were many priceless antiques, calligraphy and paintings among them. They were existences like treasures. If they were destroyed during the war, they would really be destroyed. Those that weren't destroyed would be priceless in the future. What Ryukyu Island lacked the most right now was people. What the great Ming dynasty had the most was people. If they could take the opportunity to snatch some people back, it would be a great advantage. Speaking of calligraphy and paintings, Yang Chendong had thought more than once about opening a huge museum and putting all the good things inside for future generations to admire and observe. He wanted to feel the deep heritage of this country that had thousands of years of civilization. Kuang Yi's words could be considered to have scratched his itch. Even so, Yang Chendong still didn't agree immediately. "Lord Kuang, it's not like that. I just saved his life. And he was willing to send people to protect my life and safety. That's all. If I ask for more, I'll be asking for a yard after taking an inch. Outside the Chang family's courtyard, a luxurious carriage drove out of the mansion and went straight to the Hangzhou government office in the city. Kuang Yi sat in the carriage, and there was some disappointment on his face. He had already tried his best to persuade Yang Chendong. This was also Ing Zong's intention. However, who would have thought that the other party still didn't agree? At the end of their conversation, when he asked if he could arrange for some young Ming generals to go to the mercenary camp for training, Yang Chendong directly rejected him with the reason that the base was a secret place. This kind of behavior that didn't give him any face at all gave Kuang Yi a headache. He thought that he had already shown all his cards, but the other party still didn't take them. What else could he do? The good thing was that business was business, and personal relationships were personal. Yang Chendong had a good impression of him. For his sake, not only did he return Niu Ji and the others who had caused trouble at the Chang family's courtyard, he even sent him out in his own carriage. This was already a great show of respect. Sai, this Duke of Loyalty seems young, but he does things like an old fox. Even if he rejected you, he couldn't get angry. This is also a kind of ability. In the luxurious carriage, a pair of wrinkled old hands touched the luxurious decorations in the carriage. Kuang Yi couldn't help but sigh. Whoosh! A whistling arrow suddenly whistled in the air. Then there was a burst of chaos outside, followed by the voices of Guaning and Tong Qiao. Protect the Lord and catch the assassins. The chaos outside didn't last long. After a series of weapons clashing, it gradually came to an end. Then, Guan Ying's voice came from outside the carriage. Lord, most of the assassins have been killed. Only one escaped and there are still 2 alive. They said that they were here to assassinate the Duke of Loyalty. Assassinate the Duke of Loyalty? Why did they find me? Before he could finish his sentence, Kuang Yi suddenly realized that he was in the luxurious carriage that Yang Chendong usually rode in. He immediately laughed bitterly and said, Sai, I really don't know if they have good intentions or if they did it knowingly. Chapter 341. My lord, what should we do? Guaning, who was outside, naturally did not hear Kuang Yi's muttering. He was still asking for instructions on what to do next. Forget it. Send him to the Duke of Loyalty. Let him deal with him as he sees fit. Kuang Yi lost interest. He did not even bother to ask who was trying to assassinate Yang Chendong. In his opinion, he was young and had power and honor. However, he did not know how to follow good advice. It was normal for such a person to attract assassins. Besides, if he were to poke his nose into other people's business, there was no guarantee that Yang Chendong would not have other thoughts. Since that was the case, he might as well hand the person over and earn a favor. After a short period of chaos, the carriages continued on their way to the Hangzhou government office. At the side door of the Qi residence, which was not far away from the government office, a figure climbed over the wall and quietly entered the Qi residence. The person seemed to be very familiar with the layout of the Qi residence. After a few twists and turns, he arrived at a quiet courtyard. Then he opened a door, causing a creaking sound to be heard as the door opened. As soon as the sound was heard, a scolding sound came from the wooden bed inside the door. Why are you only here now? I'm bored to death here. And the beauties you found. Just as he finished speaking, there was suddenly no sound. Then the person spoke in a nervous and fearful voice. Who are you? What do you want? Why are you here? I'm telling you, don't come near me. Otherwise, I know martial arts. I'll take care of you. Ouch. Before he could finish his sentence, the person who spoke was already restrained. A sharp dagger was placed on his neck. It looked like he would bleed if the dagger went any deeper. I'm not a bad person. Please don't kill me. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. I have money. I have a lot of money. Qi Qing's face turned pale, and his voice trembled. Spare me, spare me. I'm not a bad person. Please don't kill me. The person who spoke was Qi Qing. After being dealt with by Yang Chendong yesterday, he returned to the Qi residence to recuperate. However, he was not a good person to begin with. Even when he was recuperating, he did not stop. He ordered 2 of his followers to go out and find women for him. Just now, he thought that his subordinates had returned. Unexpectedly, it was an assassin. Moreover, the assassin's skills were not bad. He was subdued in just one move. "I don't want your money. I'm here to give you credit." There was no killing intent in the person's voice. Instead, he spoke in a calm manner. "Come, let me introduce myself. My name is Wu Yong. You must not have heard of my name, but it doesn't matter. Someone knows me, and he wants my life. I've also heard about you. The reason why I'm looking for you is because we have a common enemy. Do you understand now?" Listening to the unhurried introduction of everything, Qing's initial confusion turned into his eyes shining as he nodded his head excitedly. At the Hangzhou government office, knowing that the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, had personally come, the magistrate, Qi Bushen, brought a group of his colleagues to welcome him. The other officials naturally respected and feared Kuang Yi. Especially when they had done something wrong, they felt uneasy. However, as the magistrate of Hangzhou, the boss here, Qi Bushen, did not panic. After all, he was someone with a backer. His brother-in-law was the current Minister of Rights, Lu De. Speaking of Lu De, his strength was not to be underestimated. In the southern Ming Dynasty, Yingzong could not return to the capital after his defeat in the Tumu War. He listened to Yang Qindong's suggestion and split the Great Ming Dynasty into 2. He came to Nanjing and established the southern Ming Dynasty. Since it was an imperial court, it needed the help of hundreds of officials. Zhu Qizhen made the same choice as Baiming, which was to remove the cabinet and let the 6 ministries' minister take the lead and directly answer to the emperor. In other words, Zhu Qizhen and Zhu Qiyu made the same choice. They both wanted to centralize power. After establishing the southern Ming Dynasty, the first people to be appointed were the ministers of the 6 ministries. Among them, the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhuo, and the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, were restored to their positions. As for the others, Chen Sun, who had come from the northern capital, became the Minister of Personnel, Xiao Chuo became the Minister of Punishments, Jiang Yuan became the Minister of Works, Shang Lu became the Imperial Censor, and Yin Qian became the Envoy of Transmission. These people all had one thing in common, which was that they were all officials from the capital. However, only the Minister of Rights, Lu De, was appointed. Speaking of which, as the capital of Nanjing, there were 6 ministries in politics, and there was also the existence of the Minister of State. They were in charge of the affairs in the south. The only difference was that their position was half a rank lower than that of the minister of the northern Ming Dynasty. It was this half a rank difference that caused the ministers of the southern Ming Dynasty to be moved. However, only Lu De remained and was promoted half a rank, becoming the Minister of Rights of the southern Ming Dynasty. Merely from this point alone, one could tell that this person was very capable and had very powerful methods. Lu De was a great Confucian scholar and held a very strong position in the eyes of the scholars in the southern Ming Dynasty. In addition, he was a slick and sly person, and the Lu family was one of the top aristocratic families in the south. That was why he was the only candidate for the position of Minister of Rights in the entire south. Qing thought that even if Wu Yong failed the assassination, it would have nothing to do with him. In fact, he would have the credit of catching him and sending him over. On the other hand, if Yang Qindong died, Wu Yong would be killed as well. In this way, it would have nothing to do with him. Why wouldn't he be happy to do this kind of thing where he was the good guy? After sending Wu Yong out, he just waited for the good news in the mansion. Back to the Chang family's residence. Wu Yong was actually captured and sent over alive. Yang Wu, who was in charge of security, personally received Qing's 2 attendants. According to them, Wu Yong had intended to assassinate Qing in order to frame the Duke of Zhongdan. However, Qing's title of Hangzhou Divine Fist was not for nothing. He had unexpectedly counterattacked. After figuring out Wu Yong's identity, he had sent Wu Yong away. He said that everything that had happened in Xinglong restaurant was a misunderstanding. Wu Yong's action was to clear up the misunderstanding and mend their relationship. Of course, all of this was Wu Yong's idea. The 2 attendants listened to their master Qing's words and came to take credit. After Yang Wu asked everything, He asked the two attendants to wait for a while. He would report this to the Duke of Zhongdan. At that time, they would be rewarded. Wu Yong was tied up tightly and searched from head to toe. After confirming that there was no threat on him, he was sent to the inner courtyard under the escort of Tu Lengfeng. Yang Chendong, who had heard the news, was already on his way here. Wu Yong was once the second in command of the Blackwater Gang. When the Blackwater Gang was destroyed, this person escaped. Then he tried to assassinate him again and again, which made Yang Chendong a little angry. Originally, he thought that since this person was famous for his strategy, it would not be easy to catch him. He did not expect that he would be sent to his door. Yang Chendong certainly wanted to take a good look at this person and see how smart he was, and what kind of ability he had. In the side hall of the backyard, Wu Yong was forced to kneel on the ground by Tu Lingfeng. Then the door curtain was lifted and Yang Chendong, dressed in green, strode out. Chapter 342. The moment Yang Chendong appeared, the kneeling Wu Yong struggled with all his might. He glared furiously at Yang Chendong, as though he wanted to kill someone with his gaze. Humph. You're about to die, yet you're still so stubborn. Come on. Let him speak. I'd like to see what he can do. Yang Chendong said coldly as he looked at Wu Yong, whose mouth was gagged with a white cloth. This Wu Yong had tried to assassinate him time and time again, especially the last time in the capital. If he hadn't found that lousy team member Yunb and let the cat out of the bag, Wu Yong would have suffered a small loss. Today, Kuang Yi had caused him to suffer. Now that he had finally captured him, Wu Yong wanted to see what tricks he could play. Upon hearing Yang Chendong's order, the Lung Feng soldier in charge of watching over Wu Yong reached out to pull off the white cloth. At this time, a conspiratorial smile flashed in Wu Yong's eyes. Although it only flashed in his eyes, it was still seen by Yang Chendong, who was staring at him. Instinctively sensing that something was wrong, Yang Chendong suddenly shouted, "Don't let him open his mouth." Before he could finish speaking, the Lung Feng soldier in charge of watching over Wu Yong had already pulled off the white cloth. However, upon hearing the new order, he instinctively reached out to gag his mouth again. At this moment, a thin silver needle suddenly shot out from his mouth. Due to the Lung Feng soldier's obstruction, the needle that was supposed to be aimed at Yang Chendong instead pierced into his right arm. With a suppressed cry of pain, the member of Cold Vanguard staggered and fell to the ground. Tiger's Mane reacted quickly and reached out to support him. Concerned, he asked what was wrong and reached for the injured Lung Feng soldier's arm with his right hand. Lu Ping, what happened? Yang Wu, who was standing behind Wu Yong, saw the sudden change in front of him. He stretched out his leg and kicked Wu Yong. With just one kick, Wu Yong's body bent over. It was obvious that this kick was not light. At this moment, Tiger's Mane, who was inspecting the injury on Lu Ping's arm, said, "It's poison. His entire arm has turned black. It looks like he'll have to amputate it if he wants to stay alive." As he spoke, he raised his head to look at young Master Yang Chendong, who was watching everything unfold. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with reluctance, but he quickly asked calmly, "Lu Ping, for your safety, your right arm has to be cut off to save your life." Lung Feng, who was called Lu Ping, was a very ordinary-looking young man. Judging from his looks, he was probably not even 20 years old. At this moment, due to the poison acting up, his head was covered in layers of cold sweat, and his expression was one of extreme pain. However, when Yang Chendong asked him, he still replied in a clear voice, "Sixth young master, please do it. I'm not afraid of pain. It's just that I won't be able to be a proud member of the Lung Feng soldier in the future. It's not a problem. Even if you lose your right arm, you still have your left arm. You can still do many things. There are many positions in Crimson City that are suitable for you. As long as you're a talent, you won't be buried." After hearing these words, Yang Chendong endured the pain in his heart and stepped forward to pat Lu Ping's left shoulder. Then, with an extremely firm tone, he said to Tiger's Mane, "Do it. Do it quickly." "Young master, don't worry." Tiger's Mane's eyes were also a little red. After receiving the order, Beta Persei handed over a sharp short knife and a bowl of strong liquor. After receiving the white wine, Lu Ping tilted his head back and poured it into his mouth. Then with a burst of force, he sprayed the highly concentrated white wine onto the short knife. Following the lifting and lowering of the blade, Lu Ping's right arm, which had already turned light black, neatly fell off from his shoulder. The other Lung Feng members hurriedly went forward and carried the unconscious Lu Ping to the back for treatment. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu Yang Chendong, and Wu Yong were left in the side hall. "Young master, it's my fault. I didn't check thoroughly." Young Wu, who had sent Wu Yong here, had already lowered his head. He had checked Wu Yong's entire body. Only his mouth was not touched because it was sealed shut by the people who sent him here. In the end, it almost caused a huge disaster. Remember, if something like this happens again in the future, remove your mouth. Yang Chendong waved his hand and waved the kneeling Yang Wu away. Then he strode forward and personally grabbed Wu Yong's chin and dislocated it. After doing all this, he personally reached out and removed the white cloth from Wu Yong's mouth. Then he said in a voice full of murderous intent, "You're very good. You dare to play tricks under the young master's nose. Unfortunately, you still didn't get what you wanted. On the contrary, in the following time, you'll understand what it means to beg for death but not be able to beg for life." Killing people was nothing more than a nod of the head. But this time, he had seriously injured one of the Lung Feng brothers. Hearing him say that he could no longer be the proud member of the Lung Feng team in the future, Yang Chendong felt his heart bleeding. This was far more painful than being cut by a knife. Since others made him suffer, of course he wouldn't let them have it easy. As for the matter of killing people being nothing more than a nod of the head, he directly threw it to the back of his mind. "Yang Wu, I'll leave this person to you. I can use any method to deal with him, but remember, he can't die so quickly. At least, he can't die before we've used up all of our methods, understand? Young master, don't worry. Yang Wu knows what to do." Wu Yong, whose eyes were already filled with fear, was dragged down. Perhaps he knew what kind of fate awaited him, but he actually struggled madly. At the same time, he looked at Yang Chendong as if there were thousands of words in his eyes. Perhaps he would say, "If you want to kill, then kill, let's have a good time," etc. However, Yang Chendong was no longer interested in listening to all of this. He only knew that this matter had angered him. If he didn't vent his anger, he was afraid that he would suffocate to death. Investigate? What's going on? Interrogate the people who sent him here as well. We need to get the results as soon as possible. Yang Chendong stood upright with his hands behind his back. When he spoke, a murderous aura naturally spread out with him as the center. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and Yang Wu at the side didn't dare to be negligent. They turned around and left. Soon, the two attendants of Qi Qing who had sent Wu Yong here were crying for their parents. After a while, Tiger's Mane returned, but the news he brought back was not very good. "Young master, those two people didn't know. When they saw Wu Yong, he was already tied up. Then Qi Qing arranged for them to send him here. No evidence." Yang Chendong nodded gently. "Forget it. Since there's no evidence, then there's no need for evidence. Gather the men, and follow me to the Qi residence to arrest him." When he said this, Yang Chendong's expression had already calmed down. For others, it was simply impossible to go to the local magistrate's residence to arrest someone without any evidence. However, when it came to Yang Chendong, everything became possible. As Lu Ping said, the members of the Cold Vanguard team should be proud. If such a proud person suffered a big loss, as the master, if he couldn't get back at them, then he wouldn't be able to lead them in the future. The Qi residence. The banquet continued. Perhaps it was because Hangzhou cuisine was originally relatively light, or perhaps it was because of Kuang Ye's presence. This banquet didn't have many toasts. For Qi Bushen, Kuang Ye's presence was already enough to explain everything. At least, everything else was secondary. Therefore, he didn't drink too much during the banquet. He only toasted Kuang Yi 3 times and that was it. The banquet wasn't lively, but just as it was about to end, it suddenly became lively. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the Qi residence. Then there was the sound of the main door crashing to the ground, followed by the sound of footsteps. "What's going on?" Qi Bushen, who was sitting in the banquet, heard the commotion outside and his eyes immediately darkened. The Minister of War was in his residence today. Who was so blind to make a scene? It was really embarrassing for him. When the housekeeper saw that his master was angry, he had already turned around and walked out. However, before he could figure out what was going on, he saw a black shadow appear in front of him. Then he felt a pain in his stomach and was sent flying. With a plop, he flew 3 to 4 meters in the air and landed in the main hall where the banquet was being held. The commotion outside had already attracted everyone's attention. Suddenly, the housekeeper of the Qi residence was kicked back into the main hall. Out of instinct, Guanning and Tong Qiao both stood up from their seats. The guards behind them also drew their steel swords. Bang! A sudden gunshot rang out and hit the roof of the main hall. This shot caused the guards who wanted to rush out to stop in their tracks. Everyone was panicking at this moment, except for Kuang Yi, who was still sitting in his seat. He only raised his head to look out the window the moment the gunshot was heard. The person who fired the shot was Yang Chendong. When the gunshot rang out, he had already strode into the banquet hall. At this moment his gaze met Kuang Ye's. Then, a smile appeared on his originally calm face. Lord Qi, I'm sorry to have disturbed your refined mood. It's just that I had no choice but to come here today because... He suddenly pointed his gun at Magistrate Qi Bushen, who was sitting at the host's seat. Because someone wanted to kill me and almost succeeded. I have no choice but to seek an explanation for this matter. Yang Chendong's sudden action caused the originally noisy hall to instantly quieten down. Qi Bushen, who had already stood up and wanted to criticize Yang Chendong, fell back into his chair with a plop. Then his face turned pale and his expression changed drastically. Qi Bushen was studious when he was young. He was indeed proficient in the teachings of Confucius and Mencius. Usually, official words came out of his mouth as soon as he opened it. Occasionally, when he spoke about righteous matters, he would be impassioned and make people urinate. However, all of this was based on a theoretical foundation. When faced with a choice of life and death, his mind was already blank. At this moment, he was not thinking about the principles of the saints. He was thinking about whether the gun could shoot bullets and whether it could really kill him. Chapter 343. Yang Chendong's action made Commander Tong Qiao, who was about to speak, swallow his words. Compared to the other guards, the Hangzhou City Guard was slightly higher. He had long heard of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. He had heard that not long ago, Baiming's Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriwei, had been dragged down by this person and his entire clan had been implicated. Such a ruthless person was not someone a rank 3 general could afford to offend. Guanning, on the other hand, took a step forward when the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became heavy. When no one spoke, his expression didn't change. Duke of Loyalty and Courage? What are you doing? Please understand the situation. This is the Southern Ming Dynasty's Hangzhou, not Baiming's capital. It is also not your Yang family village or Chang family villa. Lord Qi is the prefect of Hangzhou and a rank 4 official personally appointed by the emperor. He is. This duke did not say that I wanted to kill him, but his younger cousin wanted to plot against me. Fortunately, the mercenaries reacted quickly and did not let the other party succeed. However, because of this he lost an arm. Qi Qing must give an explanation for this matter. Tiger's Mane, take the thing out. Yang Chendong signaled to Tiger's Mane behind him as he spoke. Tiger's Mane nodded and placed the severed arm on the table. The entire arm was still slightly black, and at the same time, it could be seen that the camouflage uniform was wrapped around the arm. When he saw this, Kuang Yi, who had been silent all this while, finally had a change in expression. He suddenly thought of something and couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up and asked, Duke Zhongdan, is that brother's life in danger? His life is not in danger, but his entire right arm is completely gone. Yang Chendong faced Kuang Yi. When he said these words, his voice was clearly suppressed. It's good that he is fine. When Kuang Yi heard that the mercenaries' lives were not in danger, he could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. This time he had only left the capital to do 2 things. First, it was official business. That was to patrol the various guard stations in the south. This was so that when they really needed an army, they would be able to pull them out and have enough fighting power. The second matter was the secret edict that the emperor had just issued. It was to persuade Yang Chendong to let the mercenaries behind him work for him. At this moment, if the mercenary brothers were to lose their lives, it would be even more difficult to discuss the cooperation. Fortunately, he had only lost an arm, so he was still safe. This way he could be at ease. Of course, this kind of relief was only in his heart. Seeing Yang Chendong appear with a murderous aura and take out a broken arm, he knew that if he did not give an explanation, not to mention the anger of the Duke of Loyalty, at the very least, there was no need to discuss the matter of cooperation. As the Minister of War and an important official of the imperial court, Kuang Yi had seen a lot of storms and reacted quickly. After figuring out the key point, his expression changed immediately. "Magistrate Qi, what is going on?" All of a sudden, he changed the topic and asked Qi Bushen. Many people were stunned on the spot. With such a change in attitude, many people who thought they were smart instantly understood what was going on. Minister Kuang had questioned Qi Bushen for the sake of the Duke of Loyalty. Even though he knew that Qi Bushen had the background of the Minister of Rights, Luda, he still did it without hesitation. It seemed that the rumors were true. Kuang Yi owed the Duke of Loyalty a life-saving grace and was now repaying him. Qi Bushen also thought the same. He looked at Kuang Yi with a bitter expression and said, "Lord Kuang, I really don't know what happened. Why would the Duke of Loyalty question me like this? Could it be a misunderstanding?" "Misunderstanding? Do you know who the Duke of Loyalty is? How could he misunderstand you? Since you don't know, why don't you ask your cousin to come out and explain it to us face to face?" Kuang Yi didn't look at other people's expressions and didn't have time to figure out what they were thinking. He only knew that a mercenary was injured in front of him. If he couldn't give a suitable explanation, it would be impossible for him to cooperate with the other party. For the sake of the country, for the peace of the South, and for the South Ming to have the capital to contend with Baiming, not to mention a fourth-rank magistrate, even if Minister Lu De was here, he would sacrifice himself when necessary. Perhaps no one except Yang Chendong could understand Kuang Yi's thoughts at this moment. Qi Bushen didn't understand, so he was a little conflicted about calling his cousin out. But in front of Shangguan, he couldn't say anything to refuse. He just stood there and didn't say anything. He just wanted to use this method to resist. Once Kuang Yi's anger dissipated, perhaps there would be a chance to save the situation. Qi Bushen thought himself clever and didn't say a word. Yang Chendong saw through his thoughts and smiled coldly. "Oh, it seems that I've made a mistake. Since that's the case, I'll take my leave. Sorry for the disturbance, ha ha ha." After saying this with a faint smile, Yang Chendong prepared to turn and leave. However, before he could take a step, Kuang Yi's voice rang out. "Qi Bushen, I told you to find my cousin, but you didn't hear me. Guaning, bring some men to the back residence and find him." Kuang Yi actually ordered a search of the residence. This was tantamount to falling out completely. Although it didn't matter if he offended a small fry like Qi Bushen, what would the Minister of Rights Lu De think? How would he deal with him when they met in the imperial court? Not to mention, the two of them had a good personal relationship. Why would he do this? Wouldn't there be no room for negotiation? At this moment, Tong Qiao, the commander of the Hangzhou City Guards, and Guaning were stunned. Even the prefectural magistrate, Qi Bushen, was shocked. Only Yang Chendong stood there with a faint smile on his face. He already had a plan for what he would face today. From the looks of it now, everything that had developed was going according to his imagination. It seemed that the Southern Ming Empire had indeed encountered a big problem this time. The other party's intention to invite him and the mercenaries to come out of seclusion was obvious. Lu Ping's right arm was completely crippled. It was impossible to say that Yang Chendong wasn't angry. However, if he wanted to take revenge, there were many ways. For example, he could secretly kidnap Lu Ping, or let the members of the Cold Blade Division pretend to be bandits and rush into the Qi residence to kidnap Lu Ping. No matter which method it was far better than openly denouncing him like this. However, he didn't have a choice. He wanted to see how Kuang Yi would deal with it, and where his bottom line was. Only by probing him would he be able to make more practical demands in the negotiation process to satisfy Yang Xie's development. Kuang Ye's performance didn't disappoint Yang Qindong. At least he knew that the other party was sincere. Since this was the case, many things would be much easier to handle. Guaning, who was called out, didn't understand why Minister Kuang Yi was so angry. However, since it was an order, as a subordinate, he had to obey. Immediately, he pointed at a few of his guards and led them to the backyard of the Qi residence. During this process, Qi Bushan really wanted to step forward and stop them, but when he saw the dark expression on Kuang Ye's face, Tong Qiao staring at him, and Yang Qindong standing there calmly, he didn't do anything to stop them. He had just tricked Tong Qiao and almost caused him to lose his official position. He must be holding a grudge in his heart. If he dared to openly disobey Kuang Ye's orders, Tong Qiao would be the first to jump out and teach him a lesson. It was also equivalent to performing well. The situation was stronger than the person. Not to mention the Duke of Loyal Courage, who was staring at him like a tiger watching its prey. That person had a flintlock in his hand. It was said that when he was angry, he even dealt with the Minister of Justice of the Northern Ming Dynasty. Moreover, the Minister of Justice was the trusted aide of the Emperor. He was just a magistrate. How could he withstand it? Qi Bushen stood there tactfully and didn't speak. Time passed quietly like this. After a while, a roaring voice came from the backyard. What are you doing? Who are you? Let me tell you, this is the Qi residence. I want to see my cousin. I want to see the magistrate. Don't shout or I will teach you a lesson. As for the person you want to see, you will see him soon. Guan Ying's voice came from afar. Then Qi Qing, who was tied up, appeared in the front yard in front of everyone's eyes. Qi Qing's hair was disheveled, and there was an obvious footprint on his chest. It was obvious that he had been kicked when he resisted just now. Normally, he wouldn't even dare to imagine such a thing. His cousin was the magistrate of Hangzhou. As the saying goes, even if you don't respect the monk, you still have to respect the Buddha. Who in Hangzhou would dare to treat him like this? But today, such a scene actually happened. He couldn't help but feel as if he was in a dream. When he entered the front yard and saw Qi Bushen, Qi Qing, who was known as the Hangzhou Divine Fist, cried bitterly and shouted as if he had been greatly wronged. Cousin, save me, save me. Don't panic. I am the magistrate. I won't let anyone wrong you. At this moment, Qi Bushen had returned to his original official appearance. He finally understood what was going on. If he really allowed someone to take Qi Qing away in front of him, he wouldn't be able to keep his position as the magistrate anymore. If he couldn't even protect his family, who would be loyal to him? A person's life was just a thin layer of skin. For this face, even if he had to face Kuang Yi, the minister, he had to do it. Presumably, once this matter spread out, his brother-in-law, Lu De, who was in the capital of Nanjing, would understand what he was doing now. Chapter 344. After comforting his cousin, Qi Bushen walked up to Yang Qindong and said, Duke Zhongdan, this is my Qi mansion. What are you trying to do? Bang. He was answered by a loud gunshot. It was just a gunshot, but it was so loud and sudden that it was completely out of Qi Bushen's expectations. He instinctively took 2 steps back, as if he was really afraid of being hit by the gun. Ha! Yang Qindong laughed heartily when he saw that Qi Bushen had been scared away by his spear. His gaze then landed on Qi Qing, who had been brought out. He spat out 5 words in a cold voice. Bring him here. Among the mercenaries, a man whose expression had changed greatly was pushed out from the crowd. As soon as he appeared, he attracted everyone's attention, but he didn't have any self-awareness. He didn't even look at anyone. He just pointed at Qi Qing and said, It's him. He teamed up with the second brother of the Blackwater gang, Wu Yong. He wanted to get close to the loyal duke and assassinate him. All of this was arranged by him. I was just following orders. The man who stood out was one of the 2 followers sent by Qi Qing. As for why he was the only one left, it was naturally because the other person had been killed because he refused to cooperate. This scene had happened right before his eyes. In order to save his own life, He would naturally say whatever Yang Wu wanted him to say at this moment. The sudden accusation made Qi Qing, who was being held down, change his expression greatly, and he was even more confused. Only Wu Yong and himself knew about this matter. Unless it was the other party's testimony, he would not believe anyone else's words. At this moment he kept denying it. No. It's not like this. It's not like this. He wronged me. As far as Yang Chendong was concerned, Lu Ping's broken arm must be avenged. The accusation was just a formality. Even if there was no such accusation, would he let Qi Qing off? The answer was of course impossible. Since that was the case, why would he be polite? As if he did not hear Qi Qing's shouts, he looked at Kuang Yi and said, "Sir Kuang, the witness is here. Can I take him away?" Kuang Ye's expression was a little unnatural. Naturally, he could tell that it was a little far-fetched to want to pin Qi Qing down with just one witness. However, he also knew that if he didn't vent his anger, the so-called cooperation with the mercenaries would be impossible. For the bigger picture and for the country, sacrifice was a must. He immediately nodded. "Yes, there is a witness here. Duke of Loyalty, you can take Qi Qing away for questioning, but how to deal with him will be handed over to the Yamen or the Ministry of Justice." Kuang Yi agreed to Yang Chendong's request to take him away, but at the same time, he also left some leeway. Naturally, he didn't want to offend the mercenaries, but he also didn't want to offend Lu Da. At the very least, before he received the benefits from Yang Chendong, he would not easily make preparations to side with one side. When Qi Bushen heard Kuang Yi say that he could take them away, he wanted to refute. However, when he heard the last sentence, he quickly shut his mouth. Minister Kuang had left him some face. As long as Qi Qing's matter was handed over to the Yamen or the Ministry of Justice, he believed that with his connections, Qi Bushen would definitely be able to protect him. Qi Bushen was happy, and so was Yang Chendong. After laughing a few times, he took 2 big steps forward and whispered something in Kuang Ye's ear. With this sentence, Kuang Ye's originally very serious face instantly became much better. Just as Kuang Ye's expression became better, and Qi Bushen felt that something was wrong, a gunshot rang out again. Bang! The sound reverberated throughout the front yard. As the gunshot rang out, a bloody hole appeared on Qi Qing's forehead. Then his eyes became blurry, and he fell to the ground with a plop. At this moment, he couldn't be more dead. Yang Chendong was the one who fired the shot. Just as Kuang Ye's expression became happy, he had already fired the shot. While everyone was still in shock over this sudden turn of events, he had already put away his Type 54 pistol, turned around, and walked out of the Qi Mansion's main gate. As he walked, his voice could be heard. "I'm really sorry. It went off by accident." Huh. Yang Chendong left just like that. He had suddenly barged in, arrested, and killed someone. It seemed that this series of events had been premeditated, and had caught everyone off guard. Qi Bushen was stunned for a full 2 breaths. Suddenly, his eyes burned with anger as he looked at Yang Chendong's departing back. He shouted loudly, "Men, arrest this murderer for this official. Let's see who dares." Almost as soon as Qi Bushen's voice fell, Kuang Ye's voice also rang out. The Qi Mansion's guards, who were about to make a move, were stunned when they heard Minister Kuang's words. Then, before they could react, Guaning had already led a group of men to block the Qi Mansion's gate to the outside world. Their actions seemed to be saying that no one could leave at will without Minister Kuang's order. "Kuang Yi, what are you doing?" Qi Bushen, who was burning with anger, had lost his composure at this time. In his anger, he actually shouted Minister Kuang's full name. However, Kuang Yi was not angry about this. He could understand Qi Bushen's feelings at this moment, and even understand the anger in his heart. However, if he had a choice, he would still let Yang Chendong go. All of this was not only because the other party had saved his life, but also because of a more important point. Earlier, the Duke of Loyalty had clearly said to him, "We can discuss the matter of hiring mercenaries. You can come to the mansion tomorrow to have a chat." "I can talk to the mercenaries, but the imperial court must give you generous conditions. Also, you need to talk to the Daizong. To be honest, my 2 wives have many properties in the capital in the north. If the arrangements there are not clear, I won't help either. The imperial court of the southern Ming dynasty was well aware of the Daizong's attitude toward Yang Chendong. It was truly a case of using and guarding. Otherwise, Yang Chendong would not be unable to bring his family back when he wanted to go back to his hometown to pay respects to his ancestors. If the southern Ming dynasty wanted Yang Chendong to help, they had to get Bai Ming's permission. Kuang Yi had thought about this very clearly last night. Therefore, when Yang Chendong made the request, he readily agreed. Duke of Loyalty, please rest assured. Since you want to help us, how can we let you worry about trivial matters? We will communicate with King Yu, but I'll have to trouble you to talk to the mercenaries first. After all, war waits for no one. Well said, well said. Since that's the case, let's work together. Yang Chendong nodded. Originally, negotiations were a very taxing matter, but because of Yang Chendong's magnanimity, it didn't even take an hour before Kuang Yi left. Of course, the main reason why Yang Chendong did not make things difficult for Kuang Yi was because of the Jiaoji army. Yang Chendong's dream was to realize the great Han dynasty's unification of the world. In order to achieve this goal, any foreign race would inevitably become his imaginary enemy. In the future, he could either conquer them or submit to them. Under such circumstances, how could he allow someone to invade the territory of the Han and ride on their heads? If Kuang Yi knew of Yang Chendong's ambitions, he would probably be willing to pay even less for this negotiation. He did not know that Yang Chendong had never been soft-hearted when it came to foreign invasions. Even if he was not invited, he would find a way to stand out and help. Chapter 345. Nanjing. As the supporting capital of Great Ming, it was the earliest capital of Great Ming. Because of Tu Mu's defeat, Zhu Qizhen of Ying sect came here and built a new capital here. Speaking of which, Zhu Qizhen was the most special emperor of the Ming dynasty. He had set 3 records in his life. Firstly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty who had been captured. In this life, due to Yang Chendong, he was lucky not to be captured. Secondly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty. Daizong Zhu Qiyu now addressed him as such. Thirdly, he was the only emperor of the Ming dynasty who had ascended the throne twice. When the South Ming was built, he still called himself Yingzong. He held another ascension ceremony and promoted officials. Furthermore, these records did not show that he was a great emperor. History didn't have a high opinion of him either. The process of being defeated, captured, lost his position, and restored just happened to prove that his fate was bumpy. It was because of such experiences that Zhu Qizhen wanted to do something more than any other emperor to prove his ability. With that, after establishing the South Ming, he had turned over a new leaf. He gave up on eating and playing and focused all his energy on ruling the country. His dream was to unify the great Ming dynasty one day and return to the throne of the emperor in the capital of the north. Unfortunately, the heavens did not seem to have played with him enough. No matter how hard he worked, the problems that should have appeared were not small. On the contrary, they were getting worse and worse. Just as Zhu Qizhen was developing the military and land, the chaos in the south still appeared. Not only that, the scale was even larger than in history, and even Jiaoji sent out troops. During the Yongle period, Zhu Di had conquered Jiaoji, present-day Vietnam. At that time, the one leading the troops was the late Duke Zhangfu. With the strength of the Ming army, they defeated them and established Jiaoji province. However, as the journey was too far, there were many things that could not be done. In 1431 AD, Jiaoji province was removed, and Li Li accepted the title of Ming dynasty and became the Anan king. This was a huge blow to the prestige of the central government toward the southwest chieftains. Following which, Shi Duo proved that the negative effects of Xuanda abandoning Jiaoji were long-term and fatal. This incident dealt a heavy blow to the Ming dynasty's international reputation in the western region, and shook the Ming dynasty's suzerain status. Losing Anan meant losing the West. This was something that Zhu Zhangji probably did not expect. From then on, Anan continued to disturb the border and invade the land. This time, Minzhuang King Huading took the initiative to find Li Li King, who was old but still had great ambitions. After promising him great benefits, They who were already restless finally moved out. Once Jiaoji enters the war, the Yunnan affair will only get bigger and bigger. Moreover, the chaos in Guangdong seems to be mutual, so the rear is bound to be in chaos. How was he going to make Zhu Qizhan focus on developing the nation's power and plotting Beiming to unify the country? Chaos meant that more people would suffer. Chaos meant that the emperor's imperial power would be shaken, which would inevitably be tainted by historians. Chaos meant that a rebellion would need to be quelled, which meant that a lot of money would have to be spent, and a lot of troops would have to be mobilized. All of these were things that Zhu Qizhan didn't want to see, so he naturally had a headache because of this. At this time, Empress Qian suddenly suggested asking the Duke of Loyalty for help during the banquet. In her words, since this young Duke of Loyalty could even force back the elite Walla army, he should be able to solve the chaos in the south. Empress Qian said this because she heard the words of the eunuch beside her. However, no matter who she heard it from, she felt that it made sense and said it. This was exactly what Zhu Qizhan wanted. Zhu Qizhan, who was familiar with history books, had seen the deeds of many wise emperors. He found that they all had a common characteristic, which was that they knew how to use people and were good at using capable people. Without a doubt, Yang Chendong was a capable person. Other than his age being too young, whether it was his experience, background, or what he had done, it all proved that he was a useful talent. Such a great talent, but he couldn't be used by the southern Ming dynasty, which made him vexed. Fortunately, Prince Cheng Zhu Qiyu didn't seem to know how to use people. At least when it came to Yang Chendong, he didn't use the method of using him. Instead, he kept on guard until everyone in the world could see his intentions. This gave Zhu Qizhan a glimmer of hope. It could be said that the heavens were helping him. During the chaos in the south, the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong, had to leave the capital to avoid the limelight because he overthrew the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue. At this moment, he was in his own territory. How could he let go of such a heaven-sent opportunity? He immediately sent someone to inform the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was patrolling the various military guard stations, that he had to use Yang Chendong no matter what. As long as the other party's conditions were not too excessive, he could agree to them one by one. This led to the meeting between Kuang Yi and Yang Chendong in Hangzhou. Now, Minister Cheng had reported the details of his meeting with Yang Chendong, as well as the conditions that Yang Chendong had proposed. After Zhu Qizhan read it carefully twice, he had an idea. He called the Minister of Personnel, Chen Sun, Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhua, Minister of Rights, Minister of Justice, Xiao Chua, Minister of Works, Shang Lu, and other important officials to the front of the palace for questioning. The ministers and important officials knelt first. After they rose, Zhu Qizhan said in a somewhat impatient voice, "Everyone, I wish to use Yang Chendong, the Duke of Loyalty, as a general to quell the chaos in the south. What do you all think?" There was no such thing as an airtight pants in the world, especially in the palace. Often, even a trivial matter would be infinitely magnified in the eyes of the officials. Needless to say, Kuang Yi had sent back a letter. It had passed through the hands of a few people to reach Zhu Qizhan. This news had long been leaked by outsiders. As officials favored by the emperor and relied on as important officials, which one of them had not experienced the ups and downs of the official world for decades. They had the ability to see through people's hearts. This time, the emperor had issued an edict, so they had gone through a lot on the way here. Now that they were asked by Zhu Qizhan, they all spoke in unison. "Your Majesty is wise." Seeing that no official came forward to stop him, Zhu Qizhan was overjoyed. He looked at the Minister of Rights, Lu De, and said, "Minister Lu, the Duke of Loyalty has made a request. He can lead the troops, but he needs Prince Cheng's approval. I want to let the Ministry of Rights do the work. How about it?" This official obeys. Lu De held the ceremonial tablet and walked out of the room. "Good. But who does Minister Lu want to send?" Zhu Qizhan nodded with satisfaction. He already knew that Lu De's brother-in-law had been humiliated by Yang Chendong in Hangzhou. However, his thoughts were the same as Minister Kuang Ye's. As an emperor, he only cared about the overall situation, and would not take such a small matter to heart. At most, he would give Qi Bushen an official position later. Lu De did not know what Zhu Qizhen was thinking, but at this moment he said with a serious face, "Your Majesty, since it is such a big matter, this official thinks that we should send Assistant Minister Yang. This will make it more serious." The so-called Assistant Minister Yang was the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Yang Shan. Speaking of which, Yang Shan was one of the 9 officials saved by Yang Chendong. His original position was the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. After he followed Ingzong to Nanjing, his position was restored and he was still the left Assistant Minister. Yang Shan used to be an official in the northern capital, so he knew the situation there very well. He was also a rank 3 official. Even if he went to the northern capital, he would have a high rank. It could be said that Lu De's arrangement was very suitable. Good. As per your request, let Yang Shan go to Prince Cheng's place to talk. Zhu Qizhen nodded with satisfaction. This person was exactly what he wanted, so he immediately agreed. The conversation between the monarch and the official ended quickly. After Zhu Qizhen left for the harem, several important ministers left the hall in 2s and 3s, heading out of the palace. Minister of Works Jiang Yuan and Lu De walked together. When he saw that there was no one around, he couldn't help but chuckle. "Minister Lu, good method. Yang Shan will be in trouble this time." "Sai, why did Lord Jiang say that? This old man is wholeheartedly working for the country." Lu De's expression froze for a moment, then he shook his head and smiled. Clearly, he already knew that Jiang Yuan had seen through his little trick. Although it was a little trick, it was actually an overt scheme. As mentioned before, Lu De was the only minister of the 6 ministries who was from Nanjing. Because of this, he was a little special. This caused many people to look at him with envy and a trace of jealousy. Naturally, there were people who were unhappy. Among those who were unhappy, the most important one was the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Yang Shan. The left assistant minister was a rank 3 official, and was only one step away from being a minister. However, it was often this step that many people couldn't reach in their lifetime. Not only did this require the emperor's favor, experience, ability, popularity, and luck. Yang Shan's luck seemed to be a bit worse. There was a Lu De above him, and he was not much older than him. Under such circumstances, it would be extremely difficult for him to stand out. Because it was difficult, it was difficult. Difficult did not mean that there was no hope at all. For example, as long as Lu De stepped down, his opportunity would naturally come. Because of this, whether Yang Shan did it intentionally or not, it was very difficult for him to walk the same path as Lu De. This caused the problem of internal consumption. Naturally, Lu De had noticed this long ago. However, he also knew that this Yang Shan was quite popular. In addition, he had walked out of the battlefield with Ingzong. It seemed that compared to others, he had a bit more friendship. This kind of person was not someone he could suppress or deal with as he wished. It had to be said that Lu De had some ability. He knew what the situation was, but he did not make it public. He just kept it in his heart and waited for the right opportunity to strike. Now, the opportunity had come. The emperor was going to send someone to Beiming to discuss some matters. Speaking of which, this was the first time that southern Beiming had come into contact with Beiming since it was established. Most likely no one was confident in this matter, so he gave this task to Yang Shan. This seemed to be a matter of selecting talents, but wasn't it just making things difficult for him? This was because everyone could see that Zhu Qizhen did not want to pay too much, and wanted to get things done. This task was not easy for anyone else. Chapter 346. If things didn't go well, Yang Shan might even be humiliated. At that time, he would be able to openly attack this person. Of course, there was another reason for sending Yang Chendong. It was to make things difficult for Yang Chendong. Didn't this person slap his wife's brother's face in Hang Province? Now he sent Yang Chendong, who had a relatively straightforward personality, to handle this matter. If this failed, Daizong, who was already a thorn in Emperor Daizong's side, would have an even harder time. This was also why Jiang Yuan said that he had some tricks up his sleeves. Regarding this, Lu De did not explain. He only chuckled and let it go. Lu De made his move and the job fell into Yang Shan's hands. When the imperial edict was issued, he was in a difficult position at home. Normally, to become an official of the Ministry of Rights, one had a good temper and was eloquent. Yang Shan was good at speaking, but his personality was a little too honest. To be specific, he was a little too frank. His personality was rare among diplomats, so it was easy for him to offend some people at work. Back then, it was thanks to Hu Zhao's appreciation and help that he was able to gain a foothold in the Ministry of Rights. This was also one of the reasons why Zhu Qizhen didn't promote him to Minister of Rights. Of course, Yang Shan was quite capable, especially when it came to execution. It was because of this that he became the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights without too many people objecting. However, no matter how capable he was, this matter was difficult for him. Ingzong wanted to use the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to ask him to speak in front of Daizong. However, the imperial edict did not give him any authority. On the contrary, it implied that Ingzong was one level higher than Daizong. To be able to use his people was giving him face. This kind of condition was difficult for Yang Shan. This became an impossible mission. Unfortunately, Ingzong was too arrogant. Even if he went to speak, he wouldn't be able to make it clear. Instead, he would make the emperor unhappy. Yang Shan really wanted to ask the emperor for some conditions regarding this matter. Since he wanted the emperor's help, he couldn't use a commanding tone. He had to give him some benefits. Unfortunately, he probably wouldn't be able to see them because he had offended Qiao Jixiang and Menda at work. Qiao Jixiang was the head eunuch of Ingzong's side, the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate. His position was similar to Wang Zhen. Once, because the eunuchs under his command acted irrationally, Qiao Jixiang had censured them. Even if Qiao Jixiang personally came out to intercede, it was useless. With this grudge, she naturally did not want to see the emperor at this critical moment. Menda, the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. He was also one of the important officials that Ingzong trusted, and was in charge of the security of the imperial palace. This person also had a relative who wanted to enter the Ministry of Rights through Yang Shan's connections, but was rejected at the door. Because of this, he was filled with hatred. Both ministers had been offended, and he had not received an imperial edict from the emperor to meet him. How difficult would it be to enter the palace to meet the emperor? At this moment, Yang Shan realized that he was actually quite a failure as a person. At this critical moment, no one was willing to speak up for him. Could it be that the heavens wanted the Yang family to die? Once the imperial edict was issued, there was no room for negotiation. Lu De even requested for him to leave the capital within 24 hours, which was 2 days. He said that the matter of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was very urgent and could not be delayed. With the imperial edict and the pressure of the officials, Yang Shan was unyielding and did not beg anyone. Within 24 hours of receiving the imperial edict, which was the morning of the second day, he left the capital. Although he knew that this mission would be very difficult to complete, if he did not go, the Yang family would also be unlucky. Using himself to exchange for the safety of his family, no matter how he looked at it, it was worth it. When Yang Shan left, he did not even say goodbye to anyone. He just took the corresponding document that could prove his identity and left. Naturally, no one thought highly of him when he left this time. Even the entire Yang residence was filled with the sound of crying. It was as if they knew that the chances of their master going this time were slim. Even if Daizong did not kill him, if he could not complete the mission, Ingzong would not spare him when he returned. This was because of the last time when he left the capital, there was someone behind him who made Qingyu the emperor. Since coming to the capital, Zhu Qizhen had been more careful. For example, he was more cautious about the ability of his subordinates to manage them. For a third-rank official like Yang Shan in the capital, there were naturally hidden sentries of the embroidered uniform guards around the residence. Normally, they would keep an eye on everything here. Once they discovered any abnormal movements, they would immediately respond to them. But now that Yang Shan had left from outside, there were sorrowful cries coming from the residents every day. This made the embroidered uniform guards who were in charge of monitoring feel sympathetic and relax their guard. Even when they saw an opera troupe enter the Yang residence, they did not do much inspection. The opera troupe performed for 3 days before it ended. Even if the opera troupe was closed, there would still be cries coming from time to time. Yang Shan brought the relevant documents to prove his identity from Nanjing. He traveled through wind and rain all the way. It took him only 8 days to cover a distance of nearly 1,200 kilometers. It was nearly 300 kilometers in a day. Even with his body, it was unbearable. But Yang Shan had no other choice, because he was worried that if he was negligent, he would be charged with another crime. If that happened, all his hard work would be for naught. For the sake of his family, he had no choice but to rush along. In his grief and indignation, by the time he reached the capital, he had fallen ill. The capital had already received news of Yang Shan's arrival. And with the exaggeration of Lu De and the others, the purpose of his arrival was already known in advance. In the throne room of the imperial palace, Zhu Qiyu had already pushed away all the things on the dragon table in anger. At this time, his chest was still panting heavily. It was obvious that he was very angry. It was no wonder. Lu De had spread the news that Yang Shan came to the capital as the representative of Yingzhong Zhu Qizhen to reprimand Zhu Qiyu. Having no monarch, father, brothers, and ministers were the 4 major crimes. It was to show the righteousness of the Southern Ming, and to show that the Southern Ming was the legitimate identity. As for speaking up for Yang Chendong, it was just a matter of convenience. It gave people the feeling that the person who Baiming was giving face to Prince Cheng. When the news first came, Zhu Qiyu had already lost his temper in the imperial palace. It was said that a blind eunuch was even kicked twice because of this. This was the second time he had lost his temper in the main hall. Relatively speaking, this was more of an act for the officials to see. At the same time, it was also a kind of test. To be able to enter this palace, which one of them wasn't a shrewd old thing. At this time, all of them had their heads lowered. When they raised their heads, their eyes were filled with anger. They expressed their dissatisfaction with Baiming, dissatisfaction with Yingzhong Zhu Qizhen, and their support for Zhu Qiyu, as well as their determination to stand together. After all, Yingzhong was once their master. The ancients said that loyal officials did not serve 2 masters. The fact that everyone was still standing here meant that they had already lost their position as officials. At this time, it was naturally not good for them to criticize anyone. Otherwise, if this spread out, it would be detrimental to their reputation. The officials of ancient times still regarded their reputation as extremely important. At least on the surface, they did things very well. It was because of this that even though they knew that Yingzhong had gone overboard, none of the officials stood out to say anything. Everyone's silence was perhaps the main reason why Zhu Qiyu lost his temper for the second time. Zhu Qiyu himself was the clearest about the process of ascending to the throne. It was an extraordinary act in extraordinary times. It was because of this that he was even more worried that things would repeat themselves. If these officials overthrew him like how they had pushed him to become the emperor, what should he do? At that time, it might be impossible for him to return to being Prince Cheng. He was afraid, so he needed his officials to express their loyalty. Only then could he feel more at ease. Otherwise, if there was really a day when he went up against Zhu Qizhen, who knew if there would be someone behind him who would stab him in the back? One side was probing, while the other side was thinking about their own reputation. This formed a kind of invisible confrontation, just like now. No one spoke, and an awkward atmosphere naturally arose. What? Don't you have anything to say? The atmosphere in the throne room was very quiet. Finally, the young Zhu Qiyu, who was wearing an imperial robe with a golden dragon, could not hold himself back and took the initiative to speak. However, there was a trace of anger in his voice. The emperor was angry, and the officials were nervous. However, they were only nervous. It was not to the extent of being afraid. This time, it was not just one person who did not express their opinion. Instead, all the smart people did so. With the mentality that the law could not punish the majority, what was there to be afraid of? This was the so-called, the law could not punish the majority. Even if you were the emperor, There was nothing you could do if the people below didn't say anything. Some people would say, "Isn't the emperor the most powerful? If they don't listen, you can just kill them." However, if you really did this, all the officials would be in danger. Who would dare to work for you? Your country would naturally be unstable. After questioning, there was still no one speaking. The angry Zhu Qiyu decided to call out names. He wanted to force everyone to express their opinions. Although this method would lose the emperor's face, in order to stabilize his position, he could not care less. His gaze swept over the officials. The first person he saw was the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao. Speaking of which, Hu Xiao was the oldest among the officials. He had also been an official for the longest time. He had served many emperors of the great Ming Dynasty. At the same time as the Minister of Rights, his attitude was extremely important. Zhu Qiyu looked at Hu Xiao and said, "Beloved official Hu, why don't you speak first? What is the difference between the Southern and Ming dynasties? Who is the true orthodox?" Suddenly being called out, Hu Xiao, who was holding a ceremonial tablet and wearing official robes, trembled slightly. There was a struggle and hesitation on his face, but he did not know what to say. Chapter 347. He had long received the news that Yang Shan had come to the capital as the representative of the Ying sect. He was even one step ahead of the imperial court and knew more inside information. But it was precisely because of this that he was in a difficult position. He did not even accept the suggestion given to him by a certain person. In his view, if he did that, he could not be called a truly loyal official. Perhaps his existence would be tarnished in the history books. The moment he decided not to accept that person's suggestion, Hu Xiao was already prepared to be struck by the emperor's anger. However, even at this point, he was still unwilling. He was unwilling to be the first person to be called out. Zhu Qiyu asked bluntly. He chose Hu Xiao as his first target. The other courtiers held their breaths as they watched this scene with rapt attention. Everyone knew that the emperor was going to make an example out of someone. Unless you directly stated your position, there would not be a good result. But they did not know how Zhu Qiyu would deal with it. After all, Minister who was an old official of several dynasties. More importantly, he had a granddaughter. His son-in-law was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. He was an outstanding person. Not long ago, he overthrew the Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriwe, in a fit of anger. He was also a person favored by the emperor, but he did not protect him. Such a Duke of Loyalty and Courage was not as simple as a title. He was a truly capable person. But the emperor still made an example out of Hu Xiao. It could be seen that this time he was serious. The other officials watched how Hu Xiao was going to answer himself, and how Zhu Qiyu was going to deal with it. They were also thinking about how to deal with it when they were called out next. Hu Xiao was still standing there in silence. From time to time, he recalled what a certain person had said to him. On the other hand, he was thinking about how the history books would evaluate him if he did that. As he struggled, time passed by. Zhu Qiyu on the dragon throne seemed to be a little impatient. Beloved official Hu, we are talking to you. Could it be that you are old and muddle-headed? Your Majesty, this official has something to say. Zhu Qiyu was clearly angry and even began to reprimand Hu Xiao. If he did not get the response he wanted, he would probably fly into a rage. It was possible that he would be removed from office and punished. One of the officials raised his head and took a step forward. The person who spoke was the newly appointed Minister of Justice, Su Yozhen, a second-rank official. Your Majesty, as the Son of Heaven, you are naturally the Son of Heaven. When you ascended the throne, you announced to the world that you are the ruler of this generation. Ever since you ascended to the throne, you stabilized the court, repelled the Walla, and defeated the Woku pirates. You brought peace to the Northern Territory, and these actions only serve to show that you are a true dragon, the Son of Heaven. On the other hand, the retired emperor who received the emperor's grace did not pursue the matter of Tuma's fiasco. After settling down in Nanjing, he did not achieve even an inch of merit. On the contrary, he caused the southern imperial families Wangye and common people to rebel one after another, resulting in the common people having no way to make a living. With this kind of conduct, how could he face the common people of the world? At this time he actually sent someone to reprimand your majesty. This is truly laughable, extremely laughable. After Su Yozhen finished speaking, she actually laughed 3 times in front of the court officials. However, these 3 sounds had their own reasons. The first laugh was because of the emperor's lack of self-confidence. Since he had already become the emperor, how could he be afraid of others saying that he was not the legitimate emperor? If he even cared about this point, then it could only prove one thing, and that was that he had preconceived that he was not the legitimate emperor. The second laugh was because of the reaction of the court officials. Normally, they would say how loyal they were to the emperor. However, when it came to the issue of reputation, they all wanted to be a good person. Then weren't they just deceiving themselves and others? The third laugh was because of themselves. The court officials could see that this matter was not easy to express. If they did not handle it well, they would be condemned in the history books. However, even though they knew this, they still stood up. They really had their own difficulties. The news from the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong, arrived a bit earlier than the official news from the court. At the same time, a letter arrived. The letter explained in detail what might happen in the northern Ming dynasty, and what Su Yozhen should do if she was willing to do so. In the letter, Yang Chendong did not ask Su Yozhen to do anything. However, with this letter in hand, how could he dare to neglect it? On the surface, the relationship between the two was extremely bad. It could even be said that they were enemies. However, all of this was just a cover. Su Yozhen was able to become the head of the Ministry of Works from a small imperial censor. It was all the result of Yang Chendong's secret operations. If all of this was made public, with Zhu Qiyu's personality, he would definitely not forgive him. At that time, he would lose everything he had, even his life. He had to listen to Yang Chendong's orders. If he did as he was told, he would become an evil person who was not loyal to the emperor. How to choose was truly a difficult choice. Because of this difficult situation, when Zhu Qiyu called everyone into the hall, he did not immediately express his attitude. He was still thinking about whether or not he could muddle through. He did not expect that the emperor would call out Minister Hu Ming's name. At this moment he was pushed into a very awkward situation. Hu Ming was the grandfather of Yang Chendong's legal wife, Hu Yan. At this moment, he was going to Jianing Prefecture to worship the ancestors. If he watched Hu Pa get into trouble and didn't save her, who knew what this young but bold loyal guild member would do? He was afraid that he would not have a good ending. If he stuck out his head, he would be stabbed. If he retracted his head, he would still be stabbed. However, if he stuck out his head, he would be able to live well. Not only would he be able to report to Yang Chendong, but he would also be able to express goodwill to the emperor. There was no need to hesitate about what to choose. Thus Su Yozhen stepped out. He used this method to raise Zhu Qiyu up high. At the same time he also stepped on Zhu Qizhen, who he had previously called the emperor, and degraded him to be worthless. Perhaps some of Su Yozhen's words were true, while some were slightly exaggerated. But the most important thing was his attitude. He actually took that step and spoke badly of Yingzong in front of everyone. This was not something a loyal official should do. For a time, everyone looked at Su Yozhen with different expressions. Some were shocked, some were angry, some were shameless, some were disdainful, some were envious, and so on. No matter how others looked at Su Yozhen, Zhu Qiyu was happy at this moment. Originally, when he saw that everyone did not speak, he was angry. In order to prevent everyone from two-timing, he decided to call out their names one by one and force them to express their views. In Zhu Qiyu's view, if these officials did not express their views, then they were disloyal and even hoped that Zhu Qizhen would come back. If that was the case, then at that time, these people would become Yingzong's officials again, and could continue to enjoy the glory and wealth. If that was really the case, one could imagine how many officials would be willing to fight to the death for Zhu Qizhen, if there really came a day when they had to face him head-on. What were his chances of winning? Forced by this, he had to use this matter to force the officials to express their views. The reality was the same as the worst result he had imagined. Everyone was silent. On the surface, they looked like loyal officials, but in reality, They just wanted to benefit from both sides. In his anger, he wanted to make an example out of Hu Xiao. It was because this person was a powerful official with great influence that he became the monkey to warn the others. At this moment, Su Yozhen's sudden words eased the originally heavy atmosphere. It was as if he had seen the light in the dark night. Zhu Qiyu was happy. Beloved official Su understands the world. Your words are reasonable. Zhu Qiyu was so happy that he called out Su Yozhen's name twice. Lord Su's words are reasonable. You have spoken my thoughts. The head eunuch standing next to Zhu Qiyu, Jining, quickly supported Su Yozhen. Jining was different from the other important officials. As a eunuch, he had to rely on the emperor for what kind of life he could live. If something happened to Daizong, he would not benefit no matter what. Since that was the case, he had no choice but to walk down this path. However, the other officials did not speak. As a eunuch, if he took the lead to express his opinion, it would not be reasonable. That was why he had been suppressing himself and coldly watching the other officials' reactions. Now that Su Yozhen had stood up and said the words that Zhu Qiyu wanted to hear the most, he immediately made his position clear. Following Jin Ying's statement, the other officials also said in unison, Lord Su's words are reasonable. You have spoken my thoughts. Ah, good. The sudden change in the situation made Zhu Qiyu very happy. Although he knew that some people had to say something against their will because of the situation, no matter what, he had at least won this battle on the surface. And the key to this victory was Su Yozhen. Thinking that this person was so considerate of him, he was a true loyal official. The more he looked at him, the more pleasing he was to the eye. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't want his table manners to be too unsightly, he was afraid that he would have added Su Yozhen as the grand tutor of the crown prince, which was equivalent to a first-class official. Official Su, hear the decree. I order you and the Ministry of Rights to be responsible for receiving Yangshan and raising the prestige of our country. Zhu Qiyu's voice rang out in the court. Su Yozhen knelt on the ground and gratefully accepted the decree. At this moment, he had no other way out. With what he had just said, if Yingzong really came back one day, he probably would not end well. In a sense, he was now a grasshopper on the same rope as Daizong. The small court meeting, which should have been very tense, ended. Zhu Qiyu left the hall with satisfaction, accompanied by eunuch Jining. Only then did the other officials walk out in twos and threes. However, it was clear that Su Yozhen, who was usually quite popular, had become a loner. It was as if he had contracted an infectious disease. People could not help but keep a respectful distance from him. Chapter 348. The Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao, pondered for a moment, then strode over to Su Yozhen's side. Many officials saw this, but they all had understanding expressions. After all, if Su Yozhen had not taken the initiative to stand up, Hu Xiao would not have been able to be an official of the same court as them. Minister Hu. After seeing Hu Xiao walk over, Su Yozhen's expression was respectful, and his head was slightly lowered. It was clear that this was not because Hu Xiao's status or position was higher than his, but because it was sincere respect from the bottom of his heart. Thank you, Minister Su. Hu Xiao smacked his lips. It seemed that it was difficult for him to say the word thank you. However, when he actually said it, he relaxed a lot. I don't dare. Su Yozhen hurriedly shook his head. This person was not as simple as an old official. His grandson-in-law was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Because of this, he had to be respectful, and he could only be respectful. There's nothing I wouldn't dare to do. If it weren't for Minister Su's help, I'm afraid I would have been kicked out of the imperial court by now. Hu Xiao also shook his head, looking as if he deserved the word thank you. Not at all. With the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, how could anything happen to Minister Hu? I'm sure that even if I didn't stand up, someone else would have. When Su Yozhen said this, he intentionally looked around. The more time he spent with Yang Qindong, the more he learned, the more he admired this person. Based on his intuition, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage would not only have one trump card. He should have prepared something else, but it was not the right time, so he would not reveal it. When he heard Su Yozhen mention Yang Chendong's name, a relaxed smile appeared on Hu Xiao's face. He was indeed satisfied with this grandson-in-law. Not only was he the grandson of an old friend, but his talent was also admirable. Now even he had to show his gratitude to him for protecting him. When he thought of this, how could he not be satisfied? However, before the smile could fully blossom on his face, he became a lot calmer. What he did this time is really too bold. Won't Yang Xijing Yangshan be implicated? How is he going to live in the future? Speaking of Yangshan's matter, Su Yozhen saw that no one was paying attention to him and whispered, Minister Hu, regarding this matter, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has already made plans, but we still need your cooperation. When he heard the word cooperate, Hu Xiao instinctively wanted to shake his head and refuse. After all, he really didn't want to do something like scamming his good friend. But considering that even if he didn't show up, the matter would still be carried out, and his old friend might still suffer, he could only nod and agree. All right, then this old man will take a look at sieging with Lord Su. That would be great. Minister Hu, please. Su Yozhen felt relieved. If Hu Xiao was willing to step in, things would naturally be much easier to resolve. He would also have a much easier time completing the task given to him by Yang Chendong. At the relay station of the capital, Yangshan, who had been here countless times, was now staying here. In the past, he had come here as the host to receive guests from all over the world. But now he had become an envoy and was living here. Just from this change in role, one could see Bai Ming's attitude towards him. He didn't treat him as a special envoy of the Shang Kingdom or a representative of the Ying sect, but as an envoy of the southern Ming Kingdom. Thinking of this, Yangshan, who had already caught a cold from the bumpy journey, felt even worse. His body was becoming weaker and weaker. It was to the point that he couldn't even receive guests. But when a servant came to report that Minister Hu from the Ministry of Rites had arrived, Yangshan still insisted on receiving him. He had great respect for Hu Xiao, and their relationship could be described as both a teacher and a friend. Not to mention, he had worked under this person for many years. Just based on this, how could he not receive his old superior when he came to see him? In the reception hall of the relay station, Yangshan walked in with the help of a servant. He saw Hu Xiao, who had a peaceful expression and a concerned gaze. Beside him, a man wearing a third-rank official's robe was standing with his hands behind his back and looking at him. He knew this person. He used to be an imperial censor of the censorate. He seemed to be a 6th-rank or 5th-rank official. Who would have thought that in such a short time, he would be like him, a 3rd-rank official? Sighing in his heart, Yangshan cupped his fists and said to Hu Xiao, Minister, it's been a long time. Xijing, are you okay with your body? Seeing that Yangshan's complexion wasn't too good, Hu Xiao took a step forward and gently held his arm as he asked with concern. Thank you for your concern, Minister. I'm fine, I'm fine. Cough, cough, cough. After coughing a few times, Yangshan's face turned green. Take a seat, take a seat. Hu Xiao couldn't bear to see him like this. He pulled Yangshan's arm to a chair and slowly sat down. Thank you for your concern, Minister. After sitting down, Yangshan's breathing seemed to be smoother, and he spoke with more confidence. Only when he looked at Hu Xiao, his face was still full of hope. One could imagine how he was feeling at this moment. Ever since the Battle of Timu Castle, the two of them had not seen each other for nearly 2 years. Who would have thought that when they met again, they would be serving different masters? Speaking of serving different masters, Yangshan couldn't help but think of his mission this time. The joy of meeting his old friend was diluted a lot at once. Minister, I'm here with a mission this time, but I wonder what Prince Cheng's attitude is. There's no Prince Cheng here? There's only the acting emperor. A voice suddenly sounded out. Needless to say, the person who spoke was naturally Su Yozhen, who had been silent all this time. Yangshan's face turned ghastly pale when he heard that. Fortunately, Hu Xiao was here. He was the link between the two sides. Once the situation turned bad, he became a lubricant. Therefore, when he saw Yangshan's expression, he immediately said, Xijing, this is Lord Su Yozhen. He is now the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. He is also an important official who was personally appointed by the acting emperor to receive you. If you have anything to say, you can talk to him. Yang Shan, who was about to reprimand Su Yozhen, frowned when he heard this. Even though they were both third-rank officials, one had to look at their seniority and authority. In terms of seniority, Zhang Xian was much stronger than the other party. How could he allow a junior to interfere in his conversation with the old minister? However, after this introduction, Yang Shan understood that if he wanted to complete the mission given by Ying Zong, Su Yozhen would not be able to bypass him. Even so, he politely cupped his fists and said, "So it's Minister Su. Greetings." "Assistant Minister Yang, there's no need to be so polite." Su Yozhen also bowed and said, "Since Minister who is here today, why don't we take this opportunity to talk things out and see if we can find a balance so that everyone can complete the Emperor's order earlier? Wouldn't that be wonderful?" Balance? Yang Shan shook his head after hearing this. Impossible. This is an impossible mission. How do you know it's impossible without trying? Su Yozhen raised his voice in response to Yang Shan's arbitrary judgment. How can there be a possibility? Isn't arranging for me to be at the relay station already enough to explain everything? Yang Shan replied Su Yozhen harshly. Hu Xiao was his superior, and his seniority was there for all to see. Of course, he couldn't say anything. However, Su Yozhen was a rising star, so he could say whatever he wanted. Yang Shan actually saw through the hidden meaning behind arranging for him to be at the relay station. Su Yozhen smiled. He was a smart person and naturally liked to deal with smart people. Even so, there were some things that he could say. However, before he said it, he glanced at Hu Xiao, who was frowning, as if he had some scruples. Don't be fooled by the fact that Hu Mingswood didn't say anything. He was very clear about the conversation between the two, and what they were going to say next. It was precisely because he was clear that he felt a little pained. On one side was the great Ming Dynasty that he had been loyal to for almost his entire life. On the other side was the grandson-in-law that he was most satisfied with. It was difficult for him to choose which path to take. Of course, from the perspective of righteousness, he would definitely choose to be loyal to the great Ming Dynasty without hesitation. However, if he did so, not only him, but his family and relatives would also be implicated. It was not impossible for his entire family to be executed. When he thought about how Daizong actually targeted him in the imperial court during the day, and did not care about the fact that he was an old official of several dynasties, did this not already explain a lot of problems? This kind of emperor already had doubts about him. Once he was suspicious, he was afraid that no matter what he did, he would not be able to regain the trust he had in the past. The emperor's distrust and the terrible consequences of revealing everything made Hu Zhao's original balance in his heart lose its original balance. When he noticed Su Yozhen's gaze staring at him, he finally made a decision. That was to not help either side and observe the situation first. Although he said that he would not help either side, from the fact that he knew some of the truth and did not report it, he had already begun to lean towards the loyal Duke Yang Qindong in his heart. You guys talk first, I'll go out to get some fresh air. Hu Xiao got up and casually found a reason to leave, leaving Yang Shan, who was sitting on the chair, feeling puzzled. However, before he could ask anything, Su Yozhen's voice sounded. Minister who is old, it's good to go out to get some fresh air. However, I don't know if official Yang also wants to go out to get some fresh air. You have to know that what I'm going to say next is very important. I'm afraid it will scare you. Chapter 349. Scare me. Originally, his attention was still on Hu Xiao, but because of Su Yozhen's words, he was really provoked. Let me tell you, official Su, I have been on the battlefield and have climbed out from piles of corpses. What kind of scene have I not seen? You want to scare me? I'm afraid you don't have that kind of ability. Good, very good. Su Yozhen clapped after hearing this and had a look of praise. But then his expression became more serious as he said, Yang Shan, do you know that there is no path in front of you? You are already on a path to death. A path to death? Yang Shan pretended not to understand, but in reality, he was very shocked. Some things were just things that he had thought in his heart, and had not been finalized. But how did Su Yozhen know? He was just a newly appointed Minister of Justice. Although he had a high position, he was still a new official. He should not know so many secrets of the Southern Ming Dynasty. Seeing that Yang Shan still did not want to admit it, and did not want to face the truth, Su Yozhen knew that he had to expose some shocking information. He immediately said with a righteous expression, "Official Yang, you are a 17-year-old student." After that, King Yan Zhu raised an army 1399 and started the Battle of Jingnan. Because you participated in the defense of the city, you were given a reward. In the first year of Yongle, you were changed to the Honglu Temple. The Honglu Temple was in charge of ceremonies and ceremonies. Although the position was small, you could often see the emperor. You had a great bearing, loud and clear voice, and always worked diligently. You were often noticed by Zhu Di and later became the right minister of the Honglu Temple. After Ming Renzong ascended the throne, you were promoted to the Honglu Temple. Not long after, you were promoted to the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites and also managed the Honglu Temple, right? Hearing Su Yozhen speak of his life like it was a family treasure, Yang Shan was not very surprised. Things like this could be found as long as one had the heart. Thus he nodded. "That's right. You're right. Go on." "Okay." Seeing that Yang Shan refused to give up, Su Yozhen decided not to hold back. She continued, "In the Battle of the Tuma Fortress, you were lucky. You were saved by the Duke of Loyalty. Then, you went to Nanjing with Ingzong and created the situation of the Southern Ming Dynasty. Speaking of it this way, you can be considered an old official and an important official. However, when Ingzong established the Southern Ming Dynasty and rewarded the officials, you didn't get a share. On the contrary, you were still the left assistant minister of the Board of Rites. Do you know why that is?" Without waiting for Yang Shan to explain, Su Yozhen had already answered for him. "Official Yang, outsiders say that you are an upright and eloquent person. But in fact you have your own bottom line. Because of this bottom line, you didn't choose to become a river of mud like most officials. Instead, you fell in love with the lotus flower and used the method of growing out of the mud without being stained. It is also because you scrupulously abide by your own bottom line and are unwilling to use power for profit that Ingzong did not choose you as the minister of a department. The minister of a department not only needs to be able to do things, but also needs to know how to do things. However, you only know the former. As for the latter, because of your bottom line, you have offended many people. If Ingzong really handed the Ministry of Rites to you, I'm afraid it would quickly cause chaos. That would be the biggest mistake. Not to mention, because of your unnecessary straightforwardness, you have offended Ingzong's close officials, Chao Jixiang and Menda. Then, because of your ability, you have threatened your superior, Minister Luda. Haha, after being an official for so many years, you can actually make enemies everywhere and force yourself into a dead end. To be honest, it is really admirable." Su Yozhen's words seemed to have come to an end, but it had already shocked Yang Shan quite a bit. After being an official for so many years, it wasn't that he had never thought about why he couldn't go further and become the minister of the Board of Rites from the left assistant minister. But every time, he was so close to succeeding. However, that position seemed so far away, yet so close at the same time. Every time he had hope, he would be met with disappointment. Finally, one day, Yang Shan thought it through. It was probably because of his bottom line that he wasn't willing to turn a blind eye to things that others didn't like. That was why he couldn't be handed over to him. However, even if he realized this point, it was easy to change mountains and rivers, but difficult to change one's nature. How could Yang Shan be so easily changed? It was just that this was something that he had thought about for many years. Now that Su Yozhen had so casually pointed it out, how could he not be surprised? What made him even more shocked was that the other party knew about his relationship with Luda, Chao Jixiang, and Menda. This kind of thing wasn't something that could be understood just because someone wanted to. That person had to be very familiar with him. Could it be that this Su Yozhen had long noticed him, and even collected information about him from various sources? The shock in his eyes lasted for a while. Then Yang Shan painfully shook his head. Right now, It wasn't the time to think about how the other party knew about this. Instead, he was thinking about what he should do next. Was it really like the other party said? Was he really at a dead end? What's wrong? Why aren't you saying anything? Su Yozhen had a premonition when she saw the shock in Yang Shan's eyes, followed by an indifferent attitude. She questioned Yang Shan. What are you doing? What do you want me to say? Didn't you say that I'm at a dead end? Yang Shan shook his head and looked as if he had lost his soul. His heart was filled with darkness. He thought about how he had sacrificed his youth and half of his life for the great Ming Dynasty. He didn't know how many times he had risked his life, but in the end he still couldn't avoid his family being destroyed. How could he not be disappointed? Yang Shan's disappointed expression fell completely into Su Yozhen's eyes. He knew that there were some things that could be said. Everything had gone smoother than he had imagined. He originally thought that Yang Shan would still be stubborn for a while, and would only pick a time to say the following words. However, now that Yang Shan had thought through everything and was even disheartened, it was time for him to reveal his trump card. Sir Yang, there's indeed no way forward, but why don't you think of taking a step back? As the saying goes, take a step back and you will be able to see the world. Take a step back? For a moment, Yang Shan was also a little confused by Su Yozhen's words. However, when he understood the general meaning of the other party's words, he shook his head again. There's no way back. If I can't complete this mission, even if I can return to the capital of Nanjing, those people will not let me go. Even Yingzong will not let me go. I'm afraid that even my family will be implicated. When he talked about his family, Yang Shan's expression clearly showed a little more warmth, but it was only for a moment. Yes, family. Who doesn't have a family? The reason why we work so hard, other than hoping to leave our names in history, is nothing more than wanting to let our family live a better life. But sometimes, it's often difficult to achieve such a small request. Sometimes, we even call ourselves the disciples of the sage, saying that we have great power in our hands. Everything is just a joke. It's just that. Sir Yang, your life is very good. You have been chosen, so you still have a way out. Not only will you be fine, but your family will also be fine. Su Yozhen used his family as a starting point, and suddenly changed the topic to what she wanted to say today. When he heard Su Yozhen talking about his family, he could not help but think of his dream when he was young. Wasn't it to leave his name in history, and let his family live a better life? Just as he was thinking about Feifei's words, the tone of the conversation suddenly changed to the matter of someone taking a fancy to him. This caused his mind to slow down for a moment, and even his thoughts seemed to have stopped. He needed to slowly digest the content of the words. After what seemed like a breath or a dozen breaths, Yang Shan suddenly raised his head. Sir Su, what did you say just now? I said that someone has chosen you, and he will give you a way out, and you may even have a bright future in the future. However, right now you need to bear some things, and I don't know if you are willing to do so. Su Yozhen's eyes were fixed on Yang Shan, waiting for his answer. Give me a way to live. What do I need to do? Yang Shan still didn't quite understand, but he roughly knew that other than death, there was still a path to choose from. That was enough. What you need to do is very simple, you just need to. As the saying goes, the walls have ears. Even though there were only the two of them left in the room, Su Yozhen still used the method of whispering when she talked about what was going to happen next. This showed how important this matter was. Yang Shan pricked up his ears to listen, but after a while his expression changed greatly, and he became agitated. It was unknown whether this agitation was due to anger or happiness, but in short, his face was a little red. Sir Yang, don't be too agitated. You still have time, but not much time. How about this? The letter written by your wife should be arriving soon. When the time comes, you can make your own decision. For now you should have a good rest. Forgive me for being blunt, but no matter what a person wants to do, whether it is good or bad, they must first have a good body, ha ha ha. Su Yozhen left, leaving Yang Shan alone in the chair, somewhat absent-minded. At this moment his mind was filled with many thoughts, many. Hu Shao had already left long ago. He had probably guessed what was going to happen, and it was not suitable for him to stay in this place. After leaving the relay station, Hu Xiao had become a lot more taciturn. He had already sensed something, but it was not clear. As such, before he made a final decision, he still needed to take a good look and listen. Jianing Prefecture. He had been gone for 2 years, and when Yang Chendong returned, he had already changed his identity and became the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty. It was said that both the North Tharch, Zhu Qiyu, and the South Tharch, Zhu Qizhen, thought highly of him and had a deep friendship with him. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.